Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, as always, Jesse Collings. And joining me here today, first time guest, he is the preeminent New Japan Pro Wrestling preview writer in all of professional wrestling. That's my opinion. I'm editorializing that, but I feel like
Wow.
it's okay to say that. He is a true Road to warrior. He is a consistent voice of reason in the sometimes chaotic noise surrounding New Japan. He is the five-time reigning and defending champion of the annual Voices of Wrestling fencing tournament, a notable enthusiast for bulky men from Kazakhstan, an
Yes.
underrated member of the Voices of Wrestling Massachusetts Mafia. He likes to go under the
Mhm.
radar out there in Western Mass, but
Yes.
as a Western Mass supporter, I have to recognize it. In fact, I heard this. I got a scoop right before the show that he recently returned from a trip to Big Y, which there's nothing
Yeah.
more Western Mass than getting back from a trip to Big Y.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and he is the only wrestling writer whose work will make you think you stumbled into an excerpt written by David Foster Wallace. It's J. Michael. J. Michael, welcome to the show.
Damn, Jesse. Thank you. All right. So it's proven that I at least have one reader. I'm never totally sure. I get no feedback on any of these things. I've kind of made my writing wrestling proof by just being so self-indulgent with the language, but nobody ever talks to me. So thank you for that. Yeah. Wait a minute. A supporter of Western Mass. You're from Western Mass.
I am not from Western Mass. I'm from Waltham, Massachusetts, sir.
What? But you said you went to school over here.
Yeah, I went to school there. I wasn't
Nah,
from there.
well, look, that counts. That counts. I know
No.
exactly. You told me. So
Yes.
yeah, no, Big Y. Love Big Y. Just dropped a big bill on that one. But it's they're trying to be Whole Foods now. So
Do they still have the slot machine you can pull after you go through the checkout aisle?
no, they got rid of all that stuff. It's a fucking app now. You don't get the coins. You don't get the thing, the
That
slots. Yeah, it's just.
that's awful because that's an incredible gimmick.
I know. I know. Like people would guard those gold coins, man. And if you got one, man,
Yeah,
you'll go
so
straight to the bank with it.
for like the 0% of listeners that know what we're talking about, because I don't know what our Western Mass listenership is like. Um, Big
Me.
Y is a pretty standard chain of grocery stores, and they had this gimmick where they had gold and silver coins that were essentially like coupons that would get you some free stuff. And like a gold coin was like pretty valuable. Like a gold, what would you say like a gold coin's like net value was? Like $6 or $7?
Whatever a rotisserie chicken cost.
Yeah, so like you would get these if you spend enough dollars or sometimes stuff would be on sale and if you bought like enough of them, you would get a gold or a silver coin and you could basically trade them in for other stuff. And they used to have this gimmick where like at the end of the once you like were checking out and you get your groceries bagged and after you paid, they had like a legit like little slot machine that you could pull and
Yeah.
you'd pull down and you like I don't know what the odds were on it, but you could win some of these gold or silver coins. And like that's so dumb that they got rid of that because that was an incredible gimmick. And if the choice was to go to like Big Y or like Walmart, which like Walmart might be marginally cheaper, but I would still go to Big Y because like I still get that thrill of gambling and pulling a slot machine arm. I mean,
Yeah.
so I'm disappointed they got rid of that.
Big Y is way more expensive, I've heard, than Walmart. I mean, everybody that seems to move here, and I sort of just in the business I'm in, engage with people who aren't from around here. Every time they're in, they're like, Big Y's so fucking expensive. And I'm just like, well, they want to be Whole Foods. That's what they want. So that
Yeah,
it's just everything's on the freaking app. And it sucks. It's not as endearing anymore.
yeah. I mean, Big Y used to be my go-to. Walmart was probably a little bit cheaper. Walmart would have like the occasional deal that would be like insanely cheap. Like they'd be selling like Breyer's ice cream for like $1.50 or something like that. Just like,
Right.
but Big Y was a little bit closer. Certainly when I was in college and I didn't have a car yet, I would walk to Big Y because Big Y was a lot
Mm.
closer. I went to college in North Adams, um, for anyone who's listening. But uh,
I was just at the Mocha the other day.
yeah, and you know what's right next to Mocha?
Big Y, right?
Big Y. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is boring our listeners. How many people do you think got that David Foster Wallace reference?
Uh, Me, uh, probably Joe
It-
Gagney if he listens. I
Yeah,
don't know.
it
I
was.
told you before the show I have a copy of Infinite Jest, but don't ask me if I've actually read it. It's right next to my
Yeah,
copy of Ulysses that I've also read maybe half of.
yeah. I actually read Infinite Jest like a month ago,
Wow.
um, which set me up for this David Foster Wallace joke. Um, but I didn't like it. I didn't care for it. Um,
Well, I mean, it's like there's this novel, but then you've read the piece he wrote about Federer, right?
no,
Oh, that's like one of the best pieces of sports journalism ever.
I might have
Because he's
actually
so
and not realized it.
as he's he had such a hard on for tennis. And
Oh, he
yeah, no,
did.
that was an awesome, awesome, awesome piece. Yeah, I know Infinite Jest makes that clear too. But yeah, no, he was great. Really sad. I actually met one of his nieces or something was friends with one of my cousins and came to visit her once. And yeah, like everything that I heard was like he was a really cool guy.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that much about him. I know Infinite Jest. I thought was full of like a lot of like misogyny and an extremely homophobic and transphobic book is how I would
Was
describe
it?
it.
Oh
Yeah,
no.
that's where. Well, so here's the thing: is like a lot of the it's supposed to be very funny. There are some elements of it that I do find funny, but it's so massive that there's a lot of the humor. What I would say, I would not say it's like a total like black mark on him. I just think like a lot of comedy from the '90s has aged really poorly in that regard. Like there's just like
Yeah,
a lot of that stuff would be considered like homophobic now, and I feel
for
like
sure.
that's where Infinite Jest lies in the spectrum. It's like watching like a '90s stand up or like a raunchy '90s like comedy movie that like you're like, wow, they would never make this today,
No, no.
kind of sense. um but anyway, I'm sure I know most of our listeners were tuning in to hear some David Foster Wallace
Of
literary
course.
analysis.
Well, I mean,
um
listen, and I can connect it to wrestling because, like, if you're one of the few wrestling fans who are literate, you know, wrestling makes you almost forces you to compartmentalize because, like, there's just no sane way to consume wrestling and have any sort of ethical standard for the people you're watching. Thankfully, most of them aren't saying who they're voting for coming up, but we know who most of them probably are. It's sort of like there's as much as MMA tries to fight it, there is probably a deep connection between somebody who wrestles and somebody who, beats people up for a living.
Yeah, I mean, just gym bro vibes in general.
Oh,
People that
yeah.
spend a lot of time in the gym tend to be politically leaning one way or the other. I would actually wager that most wrestlers don't vote at all,
Oh, that's actually a better point. Yeah.
right?
And probably for
Like,
the best.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of them like might have political opinions, but don't actually end up voting. People don't. People who don't like. People. These people land on their heads for a living. We can't overlook that. But I mean, it's like that with everything. It's like
Right.
people like if you really like someone, people have this tendency to like project their own political feelings like onto this person because they want this person to be like the perfect person in their eyes.
Yes.
um but certainly with athletes like across the board, like um probably shouldn't be thinking like that. um
Well, the shrewder ones pick up on that, and we see how that ends when they're sort of publicly espousing whatever they think their fans want to hear. And then generally they always get caught. And it usually ends very badly.
I will say this: I was 100%. I saw right through David Starr. That's like one of my like, I don't really call it a win, but like I knew the David Starr like socialist stuff was a gimmick. And the fact that there was like a 1 or 2 year period where like he was just super over in large part because his political espousings aligned with the UK indie fans. And I was like, there's no
Right.
way someone is like this in real life. Like this is clearly like a gimmick. Like I know when a wrestler is doing a gimmick. And then I kind of came out that he was like essentially like playing up everything for attention and for his gimmick. And it worked
Yeah.
for him for a brief period of time for sure. Um,
A bit.
one last thought on David Foster Wallace. If you ever read Infinite Jest, it's written in a very specific way. Is a kind way to say it. And after I finished the book, and I was like, I got to know what people think about this. And so I made the mistake of going on Goodreads, and like I'm going on
Oh
Goodreads, and
no.
I'm reading these reviews, and like at least half of the reviews on Goodreads, the people who wrote the reviews wrote them like in this style of the way David Foster Wallace wrote Infinite
Oh
Jest. And
no.
it's so like
No.
cringe. And it's like the
No.
first person who did that is like, ah, that's kind of funny. Like I get it. They wrote the
Right.
review like in the review. But like once you were reading some of them and like you read some of them, like what made you think like, I'm gonna write my own review and I'm gonna write it like this? Like we don't need half of them to be like that. And what's even worse is you go if you I went on YouTube to listen to some like reviews of it too, and like half the people on YouTube while they're doing it are dressed like David Foster Wallace. And for people that don't know, David Foster Wallace is like has like this iconic purple bandana he
Yep,
wears,
the
like kind
bandana.
of like has like this weird like Sammy Hagar vibe. And so like
Yes.
half if you just type in like Infinite Jest review and you look at the thumbnails, like half the people are dressed like David Foster Wallace. And I was like,
Oh
this is
no.
awful.
No.
Um
Yeah, we don't need that.
anyway, this was not a podcast about 90s literary criticism. It is
Actually,
instead.
you know what? Before you head on, I do have let me just get one more thing out. Have you ever read Nicholas Baker's The Mezzanine?
No, I've heard of it though.
Okay. I recommend you at least trying it because it's one of my least favorite like
Oh, what an
uh,
endorsement.
beloved novels. Because like it's one of those novels where it's like some guy's day at the mall and it's just him thinking about stuff and like nothing really happens, but most of it is told through like footnotes, so like it'll be him thinking about stuff and then there'll be a footnote that goes on for like 7 pages at the bottom of the pages, and I
Yeah,
couldn't have been
Infinite
more
Jest is like
infuriated.
that. Infinite Jest,
Right,
like
because
the
he
last.
loves,
Yeah.
yeah, he loves those too. In fact, I don't know which one came out first, but yeah, no, I would recommend that if you've read that through that one. It might be a good time while it's fresh in your head to check out The Mezzanine because I know it was really highly regarded, but it's also a very frustrating book. Oh, that came out in
Okay.
'88, so I guess if you want to blame somebody, blame Nicholas Baker.
Yeah. Well, what I'm seeing also from the mezzanine is that it is only 144 pages, which makes it about one tenth the length of Infinite Jest. So
Yes, and I'd say probably like 60% of that is footnotes or endnotes
yeah, I mean,
for a
because
work of fiction, which as an academic, that offends me.
yeah, for the I mean, the reason I read Infinite Jest was because I thought it'd be a fun challenge to read the book. Like, but it ended up being like I think I like calculated like I read it really fast. I read it in like 2.5 weeks. Um,
Wow, that's yeah.
like, and so I was probably reading like 3 or 4 hours a day, which is not normal for me at all. I'm not like one of those people. Like it was like an insane commitment. But I wanted to, it was kind of like finishing a marathon. The reason someone would run a marathon, like I wanted to undertake this challenge. So let me read this famous book that's like apparently really difficult to read and it's really long. And it was honestly like it was a waste of my time. Like I could have read like 5 books I actually liked in the span of that time. But it gave me some podcast content, I guess, if that's what you can call what we just talked about. Um, anyway, we're really here to talk about New Japan Pro Wrestling. J. Michael follows New Japan about as close as anyone, and he's someone whose opinion I really value. In a world where I feel like the last few years for New Japan, I feel like the criticism of it has been pretty divisive in terms of um, I think like clearly the company is not in the place it was like in the mid to late 2010s
Right.
for a variety of reasons. And I think
Mhm.
people are, and this is pretty common. You could say almost the same amount of things happening in AEW too. People are kind of struggling to grasp what New Japan is now because it's different. And it's I think kind of impacts a lot of the thoughts and criticisms people have about it.
Mhm.
Um, in general, let's just start in general, post G1. How did you feel about the G1 as an overall tournament? Like, what would you give it as a grade?
Well, so this is where, I'm glad to come on this show where it's a bit more subdued, um, because I think that like one of the things that happened recently, Rich and I talk a lot when I'm posting my stuff, probably because it takes him so long to get through my stuff. Even though he's probably the fastest reader I've ever seen in my life. But one of the things that I was doing that he didn't want was that I kept using the royal we. Like I'd never use I ever.
Hmm.
And part of that's just being a coward, just not wanting it to be like it's my stance on things. But Yeah, the reason he told me to stop wasn't even an editorial thing. It's just that, so much gets lumped in with Voices of Wrestling, where it's like it's really not as much of a hive mind as you'd think. And you saw that with the G1, where you had like me or John Carroll or Joel Abraham or Samsa, and me and Chris talk a lot about this stuff every day. And then on the other side, you had people who were definitely down on it, which, I mean, the most prominent would be Joe and Rich on the Voices of Wrestling podcast. So they were pretty down on it, but I stayed true the whole way through. I thought I would give this a solid B plus. As somebody who grades things for a living, I would say B plus. Um, Beyond proficient, but sort of below exemplary on it. Um, but contextually, it's like an A plus because after the last few years of these really deflating G1s where they just tweaked with the formula too much and really just made things all fucked up, and really unenjoyable to watch as a whole tournament, and they basically just destroyed the tournament dynamics. This one felt like a return to what it should be. And
You're talking.
also,
I'm just
yeah,
to jump in. You're talking about like the 4 blocks and the
oh,
various like other changes that they did to the tournament, right?
yes. So, like in 2022, out of nowhere, they just decided they were going to have 28 people in it, and they were going to do 4 blocks of 7, which, as somebody who's a fencer and is often in round robin tournaments, like pools of 7 just don't work as well. You just want a bigger pool. It doesn't feel substantial enough. And then this year, like last year, they kept the 4 blocks, but they added more people. They sort of changed the scheduling. It was a very bizarre scheduling in 2022 where it was like 1 match per block per night, and you need that momentum and that sort of concurrent nature of a block where they're following each other. So they fucked that up. They changed some of it last year, but I mean, it was still 4 blocks, and it just doesn't work that way. 32 people just diluted everything to the point where, you know, some of the matches, like most nights, you could probably take about half of it off and not lose anything. Also, really, really stupid. Like Samsa, if you want to piss off Chris Samsa easily, bring up the fact that they did 28 guys for G1 32 and then did 32 guys for G1 33. He's still mad about that. It's just like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, for the symmetry. But no, I thought that this one was great. And then, one of the things I was talking about before the tournament began was that it felt like the work was really restrained. 2022 and 2023 didn't feel like we saw a lot of guys bringing that G1 intensity, guys trying to outwork their spot on the card. I mean, last year, Mikey Nichols stood out for his intensity, and it's like when Mikey Nichols is standing out, something's wrong. And it's probably not something natural. It felt like something that was probably like advice or a direction that was given to the wrestlers. And what I really wanted to see was the wrestlers just sort of let loose this year. And it seemed like they did. They let the kids go. And I thought they had a good mix. And I thought they had a really interesting scheduling where, you know, there was sort of a weaving of narrative through the G1 where, it started off with these big shows. And then you had sort of the Goto peak in the middle. And then you sort of rounded things off nicely. So, there's some format things that really frustrate me still. But all in all, I thought that this was a really solid and optimistic G1.
Yeah, when I was during the tournament and I was, seeing all of the discussion about it, and I heard some people talk about like, this is one of the best G1s ever. This has been a great tournament. And I was like, "Ooh, I don't agree with that. I find that really hard to believe that people think this is one of the best G1 tournaments. But the more I think about it, I think it's probably important to think about like the context of what this tournament was relative to
Right.
like, the history of the prior G1 tournaments, in the sense that when I think of like, oh, the G1, like I'm thinking of like, and honestly, I can't even name any distinct years, but like, 2016, 2017,
18,
those kind,
19,
yeah, like where the fields with the roster was just so loaded with world class
13.
talent. Yeah. And there's just so much great stuff. But that's probably also not the normal standard of the G1. If we go back and like, if I were to compare this G1 to like a G1 from like 1999 or like a G1 from like 2004,
Oh, 2004.
Yeah, just picking some like bleaker years.
That was a very
Just
bleak year.
yeah. um, you know, then this G1 probably is on in the upper echelon, and it's fair. Like I think that's how honestly it probably should be compared to. It shouldn't necessarily be compared
Yeah,
to. There's no reason why it should be compared to the state the company was in 8 years ago, more than
right.
12 or 15 or 3, right?
Sure.
So in that context, I think like a B plus is like a pretty good rating and fair grade in terms of things. And I think things were accomplished in this G1 um, that needed to be accomplished. I'm a little there's a few things that I would have done differently, but if you took this as a what needed to be accomplished like in the big picture sense, I think that a lot of stuff got done, particularly getting Bolton Oleg some wins,
Hmm.
giving people like Gabe Kidd more of a prominent role within the company in terms
For
of
sure.
how they come across and kind of how they're
Hmm.
positioned in the roster and things like that. Um, how did you feel about Zach winning the tournament? Because he was
Well,
he was one of the favorites. I think he was an easy
yeah.
pick. But now that we actually saw it happen, what was kind of your thoughts on that?
So one second, I'm just checking on. It's actually a stat that was in my head. Yeah, just as an idea of, I'm glad you brought up Gabe Kidd. Uh, one of the stats that I look at is card placement and sort of your booking strength, sort of the average of where you are on the card every night. And Gabe Kidd was 28th out of 32 last year, and it was tied for 28th.
Yeah, which
Whereas
means he's
this year he
most
had,
he's mostly working that first match in the G1 slate.
yeah, yep. This year he was 8th out of 20th, you know? Like this is why I sort of throw this stuff out there before the tournament is I'm trying to hopefully like give people a frame to help them sort of enjoy what's going on, especially like if you were a Gabe Kidd fan or you were looking for Gabe to come out a little bit harder. That was like a big clue that, he wasn't really in a lot of mains or semi-mains, but over the course of the tournament, he was significantly higher than last year. And obviously he completely fucking took the bull by the horns on that one. I mean, I don't know of anybody who raised their stock as much as him. I guess besides maybe Uemura. But as far as Zach, the thing about Zach is on the JCast, I said that he's basically the new Shibata because, you know, like it was every fucking tournament for at least like what, 5 years or 4 or 5 years. Every New Japan Cup, every G1, we thought this was the one where Shibata's going to be the guy. 2012, 13, 14, 15, and then he finally did it in 16, and then, his brain exploded. And, for Zach, it was like, are they really going to do this? And I just like I picked it. That's what I picked. But it felt like I was sort of like being drawn towards something that I knew was sort of baleful and was not going to happen. It was just going to cause us pain. So, I was at a convention center in New Jersey, waiting for my event to start. I was literally talking to Chris Sampson as I was walking onto the strip. And like maybe 5 minutes earlier before that, Zach won. And I kind of was feeling like they were going to actually do it with Suji. So I was super pumped. Like I feel like Zach was the guy. And this is the time to do it, especially like with the way that people feel about him in Japan. Not just that he's the only one left, but that he has put in the work, that he lives there. He's essentially fluent
Yeah,
as, like
he
that.
cut the post G1 promo in Japanese.
Yeah, I mean, he's really like he's flipped the percentage on that. A lot of his backstage promos are largely Japanese. His crowd addresses have become almost entirely Japanese. The guys live there. He's sort of part of that contingent with like Chris Brooks and stuff where,
He could
they've
have
embraced the culture.
swung that flag a little bit more.
Well, see, now, so here's the thing. I was super excited and I was pumping my fist, in this convention center, and I just had to finish out right there. I just had to, close out, and it's like, all right, I'll watch the rest later. So then, like, I have my tournament. I go to the Voices Wrestling Slack, and I go to the Puro channel, and there's like 500 messages that I've missed in like 2 hours. I'm like, what the fuck is this? Usually I'm just like, all right, so what did Jeff do? But in this case, like, I turn it on, and it's like, wait, what? What the fuck did he say? Like,
Oh, yeah.
so that could be a bigger question. As far as Zack winning, though, aside from the aftermath of it, I really felt like, when we're looking at the young guys, right? Tsuji, Shota, Uemura, Narita, even Great-O-Khan to some degree. Like these guys have not been back very long. I mean, Great-O-Khan's been back for like what, about 3.5 years. But the other guys, like Tsuji just hit 1 year. Uemura just is under a year. Narita and Shota Umino are about a year and a half. Like as much as we want them to be forcefully pushed, it feels like those things are happening. One of them won the New Japan Cup, obviously. One of them made it to the final here. I feel like, it was time for Zack, right? As one final sort of thrust from his era. Because the new guys are still pretty novel. Like, I didn't feel like it was time for them. It was still time to establish them or teach the audience of what they are and what they're capable of. So, no, I thought it was Zack. I was happy for Zack, and I think he was the choice.
Yeah, I only brought up the flag waving thing because, like, I don't know, it's something like unique to Japanese pro wrestling, but I think they should
Right.
adopt it in American wrestling. Is you get like if you watch like the compilation, like New Japan has a great compilation of like I think like every G1 winner ever. I watch like once a year to get me hyped,
Yeah.
and just showing basically the final like 10 seconds of what every G1 final, and then they show like a clip from the post match speech. And they got the big trophy, but you got the big New Japan G1 flag like and Zach did not put in a full effort. I don't know, maybe he was tired or something like that, but I didn't care for his little like he waved it the way like you would give like a 5-year-old child an American flag on a 4th of July parade, and the kid's just kind of like half-heartedly waving it around. Uh, I didn't think it was
Well, I
enthusiastic
mean,
enough.
they just had, or they were about to have him defeat the purpose of the G1, so maybe he was less enthusiastic about that. But you're right. It's like, and you know what? This gets into sort of the stuff we were talking about before, where, we're from New England, we're from Massachusetts. I don't know about you, but I really don't follow college sports that much.
No, it's
I
not
mean,
a
obviously,
thing here.
I guess you kind of have to in your job a bit, but we have pro sports here. We don't have to deal with college sports here. I know BC, but we don't deal with that nonsense. Maybe hockey a bit or a lot. But like that is one thing that I think you're right about. I miss that. Like we don't see that enough in pro sports with like athletes like waving flags like they do in college or in Japan. Like there's something really grandiose about like that flag.
If I was Tony Khan and I was like running AEW, like from a production perspective, I would have wrestlers waving flags. I would have
Yeah.
like the old like Japanese style like banner flags that they would have like in the entranceway for big matches and stuff like that.
Yes.
Those are so
Yeah.
eye catching and they stand out. And I just don't know like why you wouldn't do that from an aesthetic perspective. Like when you watch like you've seen the famous, I'm sure you've seen the famous like Onita entrance
Of course.
for his match where he's just getting like mega heat and he like puts down the chair and he smokes a cigarette and they have all those like the old like I don't know they look like the old like samurai movie banner like there's probably an official name for them that I'm don't know but like they have all those sticking out of the entranceway like hanging over um the ramp and stuff like that. I was like, this is so cool. It looks nothing like anything else you would see, like certainly in American wrestling. Um,
No.
But for me, Zach, like I really like Zach. I think he's probably become, I think, like an underrated worker, just in terms of like, is this guy like an all-time great worker? Does he deserve to be in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame based on the strength of his work? That kind of
Mhm.
level of an in-ring wrestler. I did think heading into the final match that like, between Yoda Suji and Zach, and I guess if you were to ask me like who was I rooting for, I guess I was rooting for Zach. Um, but I do think the conventional smart booking would have been to put Suji over. Um, I feel like in the long run, that's the move that you would want to make if you were a booker, was be let's get this guy. And you make a good point. He's only been back for a year, which when you said that, I was like, no, he's been back for 2 years. But then I looked it up and it's like he came back June
Yeah.
2023.
Yeah.
Um, and it's because when he came back, he kind of got immediately thrust into a pretty prominent role as opposed
Oh
to
my
guys
God.
like guys like Uminu and Uemura who kind of like we're put like kind of in the mid card, and we're kind of put on like maybe like a longer track
Mhm.
to start them. But to me, it was like realistically, it's like, do you want to push this older guy who's been around for a while, I don't know, more likely to have hit his ceiling, um, or do you want to put this new homegrown native star when you really need, I think, like a top level native star? Um,
Sure.
and they went with Zach instead, which I'm not upset about at all. But I was thinking, like, just from a booking perspective, um, I felt like there was it was a chance to do something with Yoda. Um, they didn't.
Sure.
Um, there's always, you can argue that, well, they'll, this it's not Yoda's time. It'll be Yoda's time in the future. There's, he's only been back a year. There's plenty of time to get to him. Um, which you're probably right about that, but it's not always the case. Stuff happens, guys lose momentum.
Well,
Um,
what happened to Uemura?
yeah. Um,
I mean, that
yeah, that was a big one. Or even like, it's wrestling is all about one of Dave Meltzer's critical booking thoughts. Is wrestling is about time and place. Um, and I don't know if you have like just infinite chances with Suji to push him up a level. I think they maybe had a chance right when he came back. They decided not to do it then, which okay, that makes sense. Like,
mm,
let's we're not going to push him immediately as soon as he gets back. Although that's what they did with Kazuchika Okada, and I think that worked out pretty well.
sure.
Um, but and then okay, so you had another chance here with this G1 where I thought, leading up to it, with especially coming off of the end of his G1, he had the match with David Finlay. Like I felt like he had been picking up momentum. You could hear it in the building. Um, that the fans are really starting to get behind him, and it's like, okay, if he goes on and wins the G1, that's like a huge emphatic statement.
Right.
And goes on to the G1 and then presumably goes on to main event at the Tokyo Dome.
You would
Like
think.
that's yeah, one would think. I don't know why one would think that, but um but like that to me is like a really emphatic statement about this is a guy that we're
Sure.
really getting behind. We're recognizing that he's got some momentum. I'm a huge believer in Suji. I think he has the talent to get there. Um
Hmm.
and they opted not to do that. Um and they went with Zach, and like I said, I really like Zach. Like from I think from like a personal fan perspective, I was rooting for Zach for a lot of the same reasons you laid out. He had gotten close before. He had been building momentum. He's definitely more over than he's ever been before in Japan. So it's not like it's a terrible decision or anything like that. But I do feel like it was a chance to push Suji, and they opted not to do that.
Sure.
Or push Suji all the way into this hugely prominent spot. Um, and they chose not to do that. And I thought that was potentially a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, like when I say Zach's the choice, I think Suji, I wouldn't have any problems with Suji either, just from an objective standpoint. You do wonder, like, we're constantly getting this headcanon, which is very convincing in our own heads, about like this is the year that they do all the LIJ stuff. And that's kind of how I convinced myself that Suji was gonna win. It's like, all right, we're time to do it. We're gonna have all LIJ final. Seems like they're the ones that draw the most anyway, so we might as well. And then, just seeing how this tournament played out. I mean, Ren Narita sucks, and Shota Umino is an absolute disaster, on screen and off. So, you know, Uemura though, I thought had the best tournament out of any of them, at least through the league. And I thought that was a big, big, big thing for him to show and make that leap because I do truly believe he's the chosen one. But Suji is a really great fixed point, and I thought they were creating a fixed point, right? So that there's one guy that this generation is sort of now based themselves off of, right? That they're reflected off of him. And then it's either like Uemura goes to get that spot or whatever, but like one
Mhm.
of them needs to get there first for the other ones to then have a response, right? So from that standpoint, it might be a missed opportunity, but it also depends on what they were trying to do. I mean, if they value the fall so goddamn much now, who knows what they would have done with Suji? I mean, if Suji won and they did this, it would have been an absolute disgrace. I mean, it still is, but yeah, I mean, I even though I said that Zach's the guy, but I still agree with all what you said too. It's like go all in with one guy, and I think we've seen that at least one of these young guys is capable of matching that, which is one of the biggest pushes I think we've ever seen. I mean, the Dominion main event is the #2 spot of the year, and he went there like his very first match. Not even
Mhm.
any warm-up tags. First
Yeah,
match.
that's why I point is like that was a chance to really, really go like, okay, we're just totally pushing this guy, and we're ripping
Right.
up. This is a brand new chapter of New Japan Pro Wrestling,
Yeah.
and he
And
still, in a lot of ways, got that opportunity by simply by being in that match. But
sure.
yeah, and you could say the
Well, I
same
mean,
about
it's
the G1.
also well, it's like if that's what you were gonna do with Sonata after that match, right? Some dopey match with the Jungle Boy, and then his fall was gonna be eaten up by Evil in a match that didn't draw. I mean, could have done worse, but it also sort of plays into something that I think too, which is like I do want them to push guys harder out the gate. I mean, I kind of think they need to run guys through the system a bit quicker because we're seeing certainly like in DDT, at least as far as the other program I watched, DDT is pushing guys through really fast and they're
All,
getting very good.
all Japan
And
is
it's
as well.
that's right, I've seen that too. So it's like they're pushing these guys and it's like you have a couple rough years and then they make a leap. I don't know how DDT keeps finding these guys, but like New Japan just is so laborious and arduous about what they do, and it's just glacial. And but while Suji comes back and he's 30, Uemura too, you know, and the problem there is, like I like them working with the time frame that they are. It feels like this is a sensible way to push them bit by bit, but it kind of comes back to something that you said before. I think our brains have been poisoned by the Rainmaker shock. Like everything, every debut or re-debut is sort of compared to that. So that if somebody doesn't, it sort of even feels lesser if they don't do something magnanimous, like right when they come back. And I don't know, maybe this is a chance to like sort of get away from that since Okada isn't there. But I mean, even though he didn't win the title, I mean, Suji's been pushed really fucking hard.
Mhm.
And you're right. It could have been a chance to just sort of set that point that this is where we're at. And even if it's not going to draw at the dome to crazy levels, we're going to go with it. And they didn't.
How do you feel about the consistent kind of G1? And there's obviously a huge reason why they would do this because makes the tournament very interesting heading into the final few days. In terms of really like kind of a lot of like 50-50 booking within the sense of the G1 tournament in terms of making sure that the blocks are super competitive. There's a bunch of guys
Mhm.
trying to stay alive, as opposed to the flip side of like they could have done this with a guy like Suji. They could have done it with anybody, but I'll use Suji as an example. It's just like, what if Suji just won all his matches in the G1? And like you
I'm glad.
really
Yep.
went super hard with establishing this guy as um ahead of the rest of his peers, because I do think that that is somewhat of an issue where you have a lot of guys like for me New Japan is like you have Naito, who's kind
Mhm.
of in his own tier in terms of like popularity and star power and things like that. And then you have this massive second tier of
Right.
guys of various stages of their careers who can all beat each other, they can lose at any time. And it's interesting from like a perspective of like who they going to pick, who is going to break out from this gigantic second tier.
Right.
But I feel like they New Japan at this point having lost some guys that I think were in that number one tier with Naito.
Hmm.
Um, whether that's someone like Tanahashi, who's headed face down to a different part of his career, or people like Okada and Osprey, who went to AEW. There's someone you need to break somebody out, and I do feel like you could say you did that a little bit with Suji, you could say that you did it with Zach, but it still feels like there's an opportunity to really establish someone at a level above their peers, which is
Sure.
in any wrestling company critical to making them come across like a star, I think.
Hmm.
Um, and instead, the G1's last few years, particularly, has been really focusing like on like let's try to keep as many people alive in the tournament as possible heading into the final few nights, which has tons
Yeah.
of logic, and I'm not going to dispute that that's not an effective way to book a G1 because it clearly is. But I do think there's an opportunity that maybe they're missing in terms of like let's just like get the whole machine behind some guy, which to
Hmm.
create a new star. Um, and I feel like as much as I have numerous problems with WWE and their booking.
Yeah.
One thing that I do think that they do effectively is like if they decide someone's going to get a mega push,
Hmm.
they push the absolute shit out of that guy.
Actually, can I talk about that for a second? Because I'm
Yeah,
glad you brought that up. Now, I don't watch WWE, and I find them repugnant, even without,
good. This is a safe
the
space
fuck
for you to say
face.
that.
Good, good. Without, fuck face. Like you're talking about, like literary figures, like these new pictures of Vince. It's like, boy, he's leaning into the Irish thing hard. He's trying to be fucking James Joyce out there. And well, if you've read James Joyce's letters, you know that there's probably a lot more similarities between the two than you'd like to admit.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
as far as
David
WWE,
Foster Wallace could have been a writer for the Attitude Era.
imagine like the big board and the year-to-year narratives, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of
The
cross-dressing humor in Infinite Jest, like a
Oh,
lot.
Jesus Christ. I was gonna say, like, you imagine the promos he'd write for these people? God almighty. So
Okay,
the
this like Vince
WWE,
Russo, David Foster Wallace collaboration in my
you
head
imagine?
now. The
Well,
first
and
time anyone's thought of that ever.
it wouldn't be the weirdest thing, right? Because like anybody who's a big like indie snob fuckface, like the fact that Bob Mold from fucking Husker Du ended up being a writer for like sinking ship WCW is probably one of the weirdest things in wrestling when you really think about it.
David Foster Wallace and his purple bandana, and Vince Russo in his New Jersey Devils jersey, like going over a run sheet for 1999 WCW.
I don't know. They're both bros though. I
I
think it would
know.
work.
Yeah.
But WWE, I'm glad because I do think they do deserve credit because like what I think like in a lot of ways, I was just thinking about this. It popped up on John's show. WWE sort of rebuilt themselves in the New Japan peak sort of tropes and motifs. Because what made them strong again? Like since the pandemic, they've booked their champions strong, right? Long title reigns, strong title reigns, trying to like have champions win where you think they'll lose. And not just Roman, like Drew McIntyre's had a number of those runs. Bobby Lashley was very strong. Like, I think that is really like, if you're thinking about wrestling promotion, that's where you have to start. The champions need to be strong. And to do that, they need to have substantial title reigns, which is an interesting contrast to New Japan, who've had about 35 title changes, I think, already this year, and multiple ones at the top, unfortunately, in both the junior and heavyweight division. And then the other thing that they did, thinking about like some of these guys you're talking about, like I keep coming back to Suzuki-gun and how improbable it was that Suzuki-gun made themselves baby faces. And it's sort of like Gabe as well, where like if there's an endearingness, and especially if you see people in factions being sort of like legitimate camaraderie, right? Like you could tell that Suzuki-gun, even though they were so nefarious, they liked being around each other, and there was sort of like this camaraderie between them. And I think that's what babyfaced them. And you sort of saw that when they injected Sami Zayn into the bloodline, which was really just like as stagnant as possible. And then look what they've done in the last 2 years or 2.5 years since they made that decision. But when I look at that, I'm like, that's what New Japan was doing 5 or 6 years ago. And they're not right now.
So I was thinking about this, and maybe this is like me, like remembering like the halcyon days of like peak New Japan. But to me, one of the obvious things about New Japan in the mid 2000s was that, or mid 2010s was that, not the mid 2000s, definitely not the mid 2000s,
No, God,
the mid
God.
the mid
Ask me about
2010s.
2004.
Yeah, the mid. How do you feel about Bob Sapp's IWGP World Heavyweight Champion reign? Um,
Oh,
the
how
but
do
in
I
the
feel
mid,
about Brock Lesnar's?
yeah, in the mid 2010s, was like a really obvious hierarchy of top guys. You had
Yeah.
Tanahashi, Okada, and then it kind of varied. I think it started with Nakamura, and then when Nakamura left, Naito came back from Mexico.
Mhm.
He really stepped into that role, and then kind of whoever was the leader of the Bullet Club. It could have been it was AJ Styles, then it was Kenny
Right.
Omega, and then it was Jay White. Um, but they kind of had like four guys, and those guys were like relative equals in terms of being protected, but they were like
Mhm.
clearly better than everybody else at
Yes.
wrestling in New Japan. Like they won the most matches. Some combination of them main evented the Tokyo Dome and won the G1. Like
And they were faction
seemingly,
leaders.
yeah, they led their own factions, like, or if you in Tanahashi's case, he led his own like group of
Yeah, the rest
unaffiliated
of
baby
everything.
faces. Yeah, which
Yeah,
in its own sense ended up being its own faction.
which it
Um,
should be. That's a big thing too. I think Hantai being so weak and so
yeah,
nebulous is a problem.
yeah. Um, and it felt like that was just like a really core established, and it worked.
Mhm.
And like I said, when I was talking about the tiers now, where it's like Naito is in his own tier, kind of as like the last guy from that era of New Japan that's still around and still healthy? Question mark. Um,
Yeah,
and then
no.
you have, yeah, the answer is no, uh, but he's the world champion. He's the big. He's I think undisputably the biggest star in the company
Oh,
still.
easily, easily,
He
easily.
was main eventing pretty much every night he was in the G1. It felt like
Yep.
uh, it seems like he has to be the main event of the Tokyo Dome. Maybe not. We'll
Yeah,
see. Whatever
right.
that happens, but it would seem like he would have to be in it just from a star power perspective. Um, but then you have kind of everyone else, and you don't have that hierarchy, and you have this kind of big blob of guys, and it's not like there's a shortage of talent. Um,
Right. No.
that of guys that you could choose to break out and put in those positions. Um, the other thing that's related to that, and you kind of already mentioned when you talked about like the reestablishing, WWE reestablishing their top guys with these long title reigns and things like that. The other thing is, and again, maybe the nostalgia is clouding this a little bit. Maybe it wasn't really like this back then, but
Mhm.
like basically like 4 or 5 guys held the world title for like a 10-year span in New Japan. It was
Pretty
like
much, yeah.
Tanahashi, Okada, AJ Styles, Naito, Omega. That was like
That's it.
that was like it for like a 5 or 6 year run at least.
Mhm.
Um, and it made it seem like if someone won like when Omega finally won the IWGP World Title, or when Naito finally won it,
Mhm.
not only was it cool that they finally won the world title, but it also felt like a really strong message of this guy is now established into this absolute elite tier of guys, and he's going to be super prominent and super important for basically as long as he continues to wrestle. Um,
Yeah,
and now because passed, they've done all sorts of stuff for the world title, including renaming it and things like that.
renaming a new
Yeah,
lineage, yeah.
yeah, but they've kind of passed the title around to a lot of different guys in the roster,
Yeah.
and um and now it's almost like you it doesn't feel like it's, even though holding the world title is still really important, it means you're main eventing big shows, it means the company is trying to believe in you from a business perspective. It just feels like if you win the world title now, you're not necessarily joining an elite group, because you're joining a group that also contains Evil and Sonata and Shingo and these guys that they really have kind of in some ways like given up on pushing to the top.
Yeah, and
um
and unfortunately, there's one more name to add to that. I mean, and probably a reason why we're here right now. And again, like my ultimate message today is going to be very positive, but there's
mhm,
some really nitpicky things as we're in this sort of, I mean, it's an awkward transitional period where they're also like amplifying how awkward it is by making some weird decisions. And putting the title belt on Moxley this year was a very weird
mhm.
decision that they made even worse with how they treated it and the title defenses he had. I Yeah, it all starts at the top, doesn't it?
Right, and it's just like it to me. It has kind of taken some of this. Like I guess all I'm asking for is here is more protective booking.
Sure. Well, and also, like this is it really is like from the very beginning, people were saying it was a cursed title because obviously, like Ibushi made this new title, and I was really hoping Despy won actually, but Ibushi kept going, and that he's another one, by the way, that they lost as a top tier guy.
Mhm.
Not, but not
Yeah,
like
like
anything
yeah,
planned, but
well, it's important. It's important to reference in like in the context, like, and when we talk about like if we want to bring up like the G1 attendance figure, like comparing it year over
I will.
year, the state of the company, like for like the company has lost a ton of top tier talent, and a
Yeah.
lot of it is kind of through no fault of their own. So, um, like I can't blame Gato for any of that for the most part.
Sure. Well, I mean, look at what happened. Like Ibushi wins the title, or he won won the title, and
Mhm.
then he, obviously they forced him into doing this with like these hostage videos he had to do backstage explaining this, and like Ibushi doesn't know how to explain things anyway. So having him explain like what ended up being a very complicated and convoluted way to restate the title and all
Mhm.
this. Then you had Naito at the same time saying like he was going to do whatever he could to stop it, but he didn't even really understand why he was stopping it. Like that was a very strange feud.
Yeah, I also
But
just
then
don't
like,
care. Like, I don't care that, like, I don't know, maybe this is me being like a Western fan or whatever, but like, I don't really care. Like, Naito is gonna stop Ibushi from merging these titles. Like, who cares?
oh yeah. Well, and also it's like, you took the Intercontinental title and you like basically merged them, but you didn't
Yeah,
merge them, and it's
you
like,
know, which
but
they've never been able to replace the Intercontinental Championship, by the way, in terms of like how important it felt.
well, and I'm about to talk about things that were outside of their control somewhat, but we can
Mhm.
talk about things that were within their control. For instance, you have David Finlay, who, by the way, was my number two guy in this tournament by ratings. Like, there's a lot of talk about David Finlay, but I think he's been very good. But even aside how you think about his matches, like, he's the leader of a faction. He's inherited the Bullet Club lineage, and he's inherited the sort of Gato's my manager lineage. He beats Osprey and Moxley at Wrestle Kingdom. He has this like really unprecedented cage match to send Osprey off in a very big moment in Osaka, and then he loses to Dolph Ziggler, loses this title that you just established 2 months before. Like that's how you lose track of things and how people stop taking things seriously.
Yeah, that sadly sounds like a bad TNA series of events. Like, guy gets
Ah,
huge win and then
yeah,
loses to Nick Nemeth coming back from
and
WWE, coming over from
yeah,
WWE.
and look who they were back into bed with before TNA decided to get into bed with the other one.
Yeah.
So, all right, so Ibushi wins the title, then he loses it to Osprey. Osprey's neck's all fucked up, so he has to vacate. And then like, Okada finally wins it at Wrestle Kingdom, and then he loses it to Jay White, and the Jay White title reign was like an absentee title reign. He was never around. Okada wins it back and then loses it to Sonata, which started well, but it's like you look at the title reign in like totality, and it's like, why couldn't we just have kept it on Okada the whole year? I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
like maybe
What
they had inkling of what he was going to do, but
Yeah.
I mean,
I
by
mean,
all
with
accounts,
this
they didn't.
yeah. I mean, I didn't I mean, I don't I'm pretty down on Sonata overall, but like I will defend like the attempt with Sonata.
Sure,
Like they had, they wanted to they had to make a decision with this guy. They kicked the tires on him. I don't think he delivered at the way they wanted him to. Um, and that's that. But you only get somewhere if you try. So I had no
sure.
problem with what they did with that.
Well, my problem was, and honestly, I think when you really look back on the title reign, it's the fall. It's the fall that just sort of poisons your memories. Because like he had a good G1, like he was the champion fighting all the new guys, and that was kind of a cool block. It was the best block last year, and like the Suji match was really cool. But then like he got bogged down in evil, and it was a really stupid program with a really stupid payoff, and like it was a House of Torture match that didn't work. And when it doesn't work, it's rough. And unfortunately, that guy sort of, his title reign sort of soiled because of it.
And that's, to my points. Like you've got all these guys. It feels kind of like a little bit like WWE, like over the last like 10 years, where it just seemed like anyone that kind of got a little bit of momentum in the mid card eventually got a world title run. Mainly because they had two titles, they wanted to change things around. They pushed
Yep,
guys briefly and then gave up on them, whether that's like Jinder Mahal or Jack Swagger or whoever. It just seems like kind of like you devalued the lineage of your title. Everyone kind of felt like they could win the title at any time. Um, and I mean, New Japan's not quite like that, but it seems like it felt like you had this real prestige with the championship. And you can go throughout IWGP history. We mentioned like people like Bob Sapp and Brock Lesnar. Like it's not like it's always been super prestigious to hold the world title, but I feel like it's just been passed around by a lot lately that it doesn't
sure.
mean as much as it could. And part of that
I
was trying to push new guys by giving them the world title, like which is good, but I don't know, maybe they picked the wrong guys.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
weird. I mean, because like if you look at it on paper, like this is a very stout group of people, right? It's like it's Ibushi, Osprey, Shingo, Okada, Jay White. Even if you want to say like Sonata being sort of the outlier, I think it's just a lot of circumstances working against them, right? Like you can just basically write off the pandemic as it's just inherently
mhm.
like as insolvent. But like I remember when even during the pandemic, when Jay White won that title, and it was another one where I thought Okada just should have kept going. But like Jay White won the title at Dominion, and it was like there was a real energy about that, but you couldn't get him into Japan for whatever reason. I don't know the reason. It's just he just wasn't there. So it's like sometimes the decision making seems solid at first, and then it just sort of went awry. It just seems like they're a cursed company and they're a confused company with a lot of things set up to be great soon. But right now we're sort of in that awkward moment.
So
Oh, and actually, could I come back to one thing you said? I forgot to actually answer
sure.
one of your questions about like the parody booking.
Yeah.
Um, because some people like they prefer that, and then I say it's like I think it's just a case by case. Because obviously, like you're gonna get that. As somebody who's a big proponent of the one match final, and I hate the playoff, I think the playoffs sort of feed into that, honestly, especially like this year, where you have three people advancing, and the final night scenarios were really frustrating to work out. But like you look out some of these past G1s, right? Like the 2019 G1, everybody would say is an incredible G1, like an A plus G1, right? And the A block, the final night, it was Ibushi and Okada, and that was it. Nobody else was alive. And you think about Osprey, Tanahashi, Sabre, even Kenta in that tour. Like these are things that you fondly remember as a really great G1, but at the end, it was really just down to two guys. Even when you think about a few years ago when Jeff Cobb and Okada beat everybody, right? And it was like, could Jeff Cobb go 9-0? And he didn't, but like that was exciting too. You know, I think it's inevitable, the parody booking. I think they usually balance it well with like one block where people emerge and one block where it's sort of a big mess.
Mhm.
The problem this year, I think it's like a lot of things amalgamating. For instance, you look at the final results and you're like, where are the faction leaders? Like you have Zack Sabre Jr. and David Finlay won their block, and they are faction leaders. But then it's like Evil came in fourth, Sonata came in seventh. We don't even like we don't have a leader of Chaos. We don't have a leader of United Empire. There's just so much things that are sort of amorphous, and I do agree with you that like I think they're slowly sort of working their way towards a hierarchy, especially as the young guys sort of like Uemura and Tsuji sort of thrown into factions. Amino's trying to take over Hantai, but nobody's taking him seriously right now. And Narita got tossed in the House of Torture, and it's like, I think we're at that place where like we're sort of building it up, but I don't think you can wait too long. I think, within the next few years, those guys need to be leading factions, especially if you still are going to go with the Three Musketeers thing. Like, they need to be very clear delineations about who's at the top of these factions, because that is like, if you want to know to give away Chris's secrets, how does Chris Sampson predict things so well? He just kind of chooses the faction leaders because that's how they've always booked. And I think it's a testament to sort of how things are a bit confused right now. That it's not even that they don't even know who to choose because they don't have that clear like delineation right now.
Yeah, well, the thing with the playoffs is like if you're gonna have two people advance from the block, you can get away with like having someone just blitz through the tournament and still have some drama because there's that second spot that's still
Right.
available. Um, so I was saying like one of the reasons maybe they don't want to just have someone go undefeated and kill everyone is because they want to have like as many like they want to have drama at the end of the night. They don't want to have like this lame duck final day. But with the
Right.
second spot in the tournament, you can do that um, because one of the spots is locked up, but you can have all these people trying to get in for that last wild card spot, like you would, if you were to watch like baseball or football or anything like that. Like, sometimes the division is out of reach, but all these teams are still alive trying to clinch a spot in the wild card spot. You can still
Right.
book like that. But yeah, I mean, I think like time and time again, I think it just comes down to like wanting some more protective booking to
Sure.
elevate some guys is ultimately all I'm focused on. And
Well, and that's what I always say. It's
yeah,
like the strongest thing you can do. Like I feel like a G1 block winner should be a big deal, winning your block. And it hasn't been the last few years. Even when they did, single advance with 4 blocks, he's still in a playoff. I miss that immediacy between A block final, B block final, final. Like that 3-night run wherever, Budokan, Rio, Goku, whatever. And I feel like that's a good way to just like say these are guys. Like the only one person emerges, and this is the person that emerged. But it could be that they just don't feel ready to do that yet with who
mhm.
they've got. But it's
We're
sort of
gonna
like Wrestle Kingdom because I thought Joe had a good point on the Voices of Wrestling show, where it's like it seems like they don't trust the roster, and like I don't blame the roster for that. I think that's on them. Like they've got to trust these guys, and even like it's a weekend January 4th show, so it kind of annoys me that they don't have a stronger vision or they're not going to present a strong vision of what that should be.
mhm.
Because like a weekday Wrestle Kingdom, who cares? There's only so much you're going to do or draw. This is a Saturday, January 4th, and we're going into it in a very sort of complex and labyrinthine way. I don't know. It just feels like they're a bit meek right now,
Yeah.
when I
Well,
really
let's
wish they'd
let's
be a bit stronger.
let's cut to the chase. Like Zack Sabre Jr.'s breaking tradition, not taking his G1 title shot at the Tokyo Dome. He's wrestling at Kings of Pro Wrestling um, in October. What was your like takeaway from that?
Ah, it's fucking stupid. Um,
Yeah.
there's just no other like there's no fancy way to put it. It's just like, I understand where the people who like it and all that, and I can understand like, the falls were boring and whatever, but to me it's like, who gives a fuck about the fall, right? Like who gives a fuck? Like Wrestle Kingdom's the point, and that's on them. Like they could find ways to do it. I think the briefcase was more trouble than it was worth, honestly. Like I
Yeah,
think
I
connecting,
didn't like that
yeah,
gimmick, the briefcase. I didn't like the random title defense of the G1 shot. Like you win the whole G1
it's
tournament, now
dumb.
you got to win another match
Well,
against
also,
some guy.
the thing that I always thought about that, and we saw it with the Jay White thing, which, they tried to tell like a 4-month story in a 2-month span because of the pandemic and they didn't adjust. But like winning the G1 to me is on par with like any other championship they've got,
Mhm.
besides the main one.
Well,
And to
like
me, like making
what's
that something that you can defend, like why is that something you can defend? I think it inherently devalues it. How can you defend it? Like it's a tournament that they won. Like making it that to me was a problem. And by getting rid of it a couple years ago with Okada, like I thought you solved the problem. It's just we know these two people are going to face each other in a few months, and whatever happens along the way is not going to change that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean you're right about like it's um like why would you defend like the Chiefs won the Super Bowl like last year, but like they lost to the Raiders. So like would they like it'd be like after the Super Bowl, all right, you gotta fight you gotta play the Raiders to
Right.
defend your Super Bowl win. Otherwise the Raiders win the Super Bowl. Like
And
um
the reason why they never did it when besides the pandemic, but like that was a clear story that they just didn't have time to tell. The reason why you don't do it and have somebody like win the title shot and then go is because like is the crowd really supposed to get behind that person? Like they didn't actually win the G1.
yeah.
So they don't have the credibility or the authenticity to challenge for the title. It just feels cheap.
And at this point, what's the biggest accomplishment a wrestler in New Japan can have?
Winning that title, I guess, or winning the G1.
I would say main eventing Wrestle
Oh, main
Kingdom,
event. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? That's like the biggest accomplishment. You can win the world title and not do that.
Actually, you're
Um,
right because most of the time people like the first, I think it was what, 6 years that they had the briefcase, the challenger lost.
mhm.
And that was
Yeah,
like
like
their peak years too.
but like so Zach wins the G1. What does that say other than Zach gets his name etched in history as a G1 winner and things like that. What does it really say? It's like, okay, that not only does Zack have won the G1, you have this if you're this big Zack Sabre Jr. supporter that's been following him for a long time,
Mhm.
not only does it say that he won the G1, but now it's like, oh, now that he's going to get this opportunity, he's going to main event Wrestle Kingdom, like which is
Big
just a
deal.
hugely prestigious opportunity. And then he's like, actually, I think I'm gonna rest. I like Sumo Hall. I'm gonna,
Like Sumo Hall.
yeah, I'm gonna wrestle in October. And it's like, oh wow. So like, what does that say? Does that say that they don't have faith in Zach to main event Wrestle Kingdom? Or they have some big storyline? Like when he said that, my thought was they're gonna have an outsider come in and main event Wrestle Kingdom.
Well, if it's not Takeshita, then I'm not interested.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it could be because they're doing the joint AEW show the next day. It could literally be like anyone. It could be Osprey, it could
That's
be Okada, it could
right.
be Omega, it could be one of those people. Which,
Yeah, I mean, I
um,
think that just shows like this is a very desperate company right now. Obviously, with
mhm,
there's a lot going on in Japan, but like just the way that they're booking stuff, and then obviously with this, it's like we're not totally out of the pandemic, right? Like in the pandemic, they did what they had to do, right? So they booked Cork and Hall like 20 times a month and aired every single one of them,
yeah,
right? They did all of it. Like they're just going to run dome after dome because at the very least they can have higher capacities there.
mhm,
And then it's like, we're going to sacrifice Wrestle Kingdom because at the very least, maybe the AEW thing will get us more stuff and just trying to make our way through this. It's I understand it, I get it, it sucks, but that's I think where they're coming from with it. The problem here is just like there's no way to look at this that justifies what Zach does. Like obviously from a smart, annoying perspective of just knowing everything and being a know-it-all, it's like this is a clear sign that either they don't trust him or they just don't have faith that he could do it there, or they're just like in some sort of crisis and they're like, we can't sacrifice a fall. But then from a kayfabe perspective, it's like, I mean, if you're just looking at this as like, from just a fan's perspective and not thinking about the hidden hand of the booker, wouldn't you be pissed off? You're like, you just won the G1 and I've been expecting you, and it's not gonna be like, oh boy, I get to see it 3 months early. It's like, the fuck? I wanted to see you face Naito at the Tokyo Dome.
mhm. Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Well, it's like, what's the statement you're telling your fans? Like the prestige of main eventing Wrestle Kingdom is like an enormous, enormous accomplishment. I guess like I'm
right,
saying that like from my personal fan perspective, and it's like that really means something. And part of the excitement of winning the G1 is not only are you winning the G1 and you get the trophy and you can wave the flag, but you are then going to get this incredible opportunity to main event this prestigious show in a position that I feel like still has some prestige to it. Um, and now it's not going to happen. Now,
right.
well, we think it's not going to happen. Like I when I
Maybe,
saw
yeah.
it, I was like, okay, well, it feels if it's because it's not going to be. Let's say Zach isn't going to be the main event of Wrestle Kingdom. Who is going to be the main event? What's going to be in the main event of Wrestle Kingdom? It's probably going to be Naito.
Yeah, it's gotta
Who
be.
would? But who would he be wrestling? Is he going to be wrestling someone else on this that was like in the G1 that's on this New Japan roster? Like, who would
I
that be, and
mean,
why wouldn't you just have that
right,
person win the G1 in the first
win
place?
G1.
I
Well,
guess you
unless
want
it's Hiromu, but I'm not,
yeah, I guess that's
I see where
possible.
people are coming from, but I'm not really compelled by that match. And to be honest with you, I'm not so sure that the crowds would be compelled by that either right now. Like they've got a lot of work to do to make Hiromu, who's pretty cold, kind of been on the shelf for a while. Maybe just having it will make people excited, but I don't know. As
Yeah,
as a Tokyo Dome main event, that feels like a sumo hall sort of deal. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
maybe they could do that at Kings of Pro Wrestling instead.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I mean that's the point. So that's why my mind immediately went to Outsider,
yeah.
which feels like I don't know, pick your AEW guy. I mean, I personally I would think it'd be pretty cool. but at the same time, it seems like a short-term decision. Like, we just gotta try to get attention on us now, as opposed to,
Right.
like, whether it was Zach or if you went with Suji, it would be like, "Here's a statement about the direction of our company and how we're headed into the future." Um, as opposed to, we just gotta, like you said, we're kind of still in the pandemic mode where it's like, we just gotta grab whatever we can right now to survive, which
Right.
is not a historically speaking, not a healthy way to book a wrestling company. Um,
No, and I mean, I hope it works. I mean, I think they have the pieces set up for sure, especially after this G1, that if they're feeling like they just have to tread water, you know, we've got so much that you can run with for a very long time afterwards. It's just at a certain point we have to stop trying to tread water and just make that transition.
mhm. We're gonna play a game. I'm gonna try to do this as quickly as humanly possible.
Okay.
But we're gonna play a quick game. It's gonna be called very simple: stock up, stock down. Gonna give you a name. You tell me if you think their stock went up in the G1 or stock went down in the G1. I guess I'll offer the opportunity. You can say stock stayed the same.
Okay.
But you just tell me what you think, and maybe we'll talk about like one or two sentences about each of them. But we'll start. Oleg Bolton.
Oh my God. Stock through the fucking roof.
Yeah, that's an easy one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Put
Yeah,
the title on him. Put the title on him January 4th. Fuck it.
yeah.
That'll send a message.
He's yeah. I mean, he's got he's natural, and he has this real sense of physicality that is
Oh, and
sometimes
like
lacking.
a physique, like that physique that you don't really see there.
Yeah, I mean, he's a big boy. Red
And apparently he
Narita.
didn't he oh so and he, apparently he didn't know what wrestling was until he got to New Japan, however many years ago, to be in their, amateur wrestling system. So he might just like be a prodigy, honestly.
He wouldn't be the first guy, He wouldn't be the first guy like that.
No, no, no. Rennerita, well, this is where it's tricky because I think like in kayfabe terms, it's probably stock up a bit, but I mean, you know, we're not
Yeah,
evaluating this totally
yeah,
that way, and I'm going to say
yeah.
stock down. I mean, he sucks. He's a fraction of what he was before he came back.
We don't need another interference laden heel
He's not good
in
at
New
it.
Japan. I hate
Like
I mean, I know this might come across as controversial to somebody. I hate House of Torture. I hate how predictable almost all the matches are. I think it's every one of their finishes is like super duper uncreative. I can't believe people defend it. I just it's so bad. It's not what I want in wrestling at all. It's not what I want in New Japan specifically. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I want them to all go away. People talk about, Tanahashi, like, gives these press conferences and he talks about how, he wants to kind of clean up the company to have less interference. And people talk
Yeah, it's
about
not
it like,
happening.
well, people talk about it like wrestling is real. Like they'll talk about like, oh, you can see Tanahashi starting to make a difference because there's a little less, interference in this match. And I'm like, how about we just get rid of
Nah.
it entirely? Can we do that? I know that might be unpopular. I know some people will be like, oh, that's a crucial part of Ghetto's booking is he always has interference. But no, let's get rid of it because it's been going on for a decade. I
I
don't care
guess. I mean,
anymore. Don't
I
care.
guess I
Get
never
rid of them all.
during the early stages of Bullet Club, like anything went, but like even during AJ Styles, and then they really didn't do this at all under Kenny. So it was really just like a couple years there. But even with AJ, it's like they didn't really do it like this, where it almost becomes sort of almost like a satirical what they're doing.
Yeah. Well,
Like
it's been going
it's
on
like
so
WCW,
long. Yeah.
right?
It
It's like
just
late stage WCW. Like you're just
yeah.
looking and nothing matters until, Yoshinobu Kanemaru comes flying out of the curtain with his whiskey.
Yeah, and it's just I mean, it ruins some matches. I like there'll be occasional matches where like um they'll do the interference. Usually it's an LIJ match, right? They'll do the interference and
Mhm,
eventually when the LIJ guys come out, the crowd pops and then the babyface beats evil or whatever. And like it's like
mhm.
okay, like it did work there, but it most of the time I feel like it doesn't. And it's honestly it's like offensive to me because it's not creative anymore. It's not like these are creative spots. It's the same, Kanemaru with the whiskey bottle, Dick Togo with the garrote wire. It's just it's like
And the powder.
yeah, it's
Don't
just
forget
like
the powder.
it's the same
New
it's the
wrinkle.
same spots over and over again. It's been happening for years and like they just keep getting away with it. I think if any other wrestling promotion just did this so
Yeah.
consistently night after night after night, the same spots over and over again, it would get ripped to shreds, and I don't like it. But anyway,
You know,
moving on.
I have thoughts on that, but I'll save it for Evil actually,
Yeah,
because
I
Ren
mean,
Narita just sucks.
well, like, and the thing with Ren Narita is that like I think Ren
He could be
Narita,
better.
yeah, he could be better. And like I understand they had to pivot from the Son of Strong style stuff because I felt like that just never got over and it kind of felt unearned.
Oh, I would
Um,
disagree there. I would disagree because it was awful, but the Shota Umino Ren Narita sort of like, Fujoshi bait tag team nonsense.
mhm,
I thought it was actually getting Ren Narita responses for the first time. Like he kind of worked in that tag team dynamic,
mhm.
but then they broke him up after a month. So here we are a
Yeah,
year later.
I thought uh, I think Joe Lanza made a good point when he was talking about Yoshinari Agawa, um, and how like just like good, like you're good, solid mid card, undercard worker that can kind of just put together matches. Like that's something
Hmm.
that has kind of been undervalued. And he mentioned like Ren Narita, like maybe could have been that guy,
Sure.
but instead they pivoted his character into being like yet another interference laden guy. I guess he's like, wait, is he the number two guy in House of Torture? Probably, right?
I mean, I guess he would be just by process of elimination.
Yeah, because the other there's really like it's evil and like everyone else isn't really protected at all.
I mean, I
Um,
guess it would be Show, but you're not going to consider a junior your number two guy. But
yeah,
I guess
yeah.
like if you were looking at an open weight, I would say Show
Mhm.
as the only other good member, but Ren's not.
He's running out with that little push-up bar.
Oh, God, yeah,
Anyway,
it's just farcical. Yeah,
controversial name here for some people. Callum Newman.
I don't know because it's like where was his stock before this? I mean, I guess I would say I'm not gonna try to be swayed by what's out there in the discourse. I'll say just stock even because ultimately like his goal in the G1 was to just be in a G1
Mhm.
and he was. So he did it.
Yeah, so I would slide towards. I mean, I thought he was aggressively fine
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the G1. I think there were some I saw some comments about him being like really, really bad, like dragging down the G1. And I was like, I think he's first or second match pretty much every night.
Yeah, he didn't mean
Um,
enough.
like he's fine.
It did get kind of rough as the tournament went on. Like he definitely lost his legs and wasn't able to go
Mhm.
as fast as he could, which is kind of a problem when your gimmick is that you're fast. But
He's the Prince of Pace.
he's the Prince of Pace. Yeah, thanks for the alliteration, pal.
Well, pace is a soccer term. In
Oh, is
soccer, you
it?
don't. Yeah, well, it's like a English soccer term. Like you don't say someone's fat. You don't necessarily say someone's fast or something like that. You'd be like, they've got like if a player is fast, you'd say like he's got tremendous pace, or he's just like, he doesn't have the pace to keep up. Like it's used very frequently in terms
Oh
of
my
just saying
God.
speed or fast. So that's where it comes
You
from.
know, anytime I think I just can't handle being in wrestling culture anymore, I think real sports culture can be so much worse. And soccer culture, football culture, association football culture is like honestly maybe the worst in the world.
In terms of like what, like engaging in like fan discourse.
That and like whenever you see some real dickhead online, especially in wrestling, like some WWE honk or whatever,
Yeah,
or just like if you're online and it's like, okay, so this person's virulently anti-transgender. Well, they're definitely from England. We can just start from there. And then it's like, oh, yep, there's the soccer jersey, or it's like, somebody's like trying to troll AEW fans. And as an outsider, I'm like, what's the point of this? And it's like, yep, there we go. There's the full kit.
yeah. There he is, and they're mostly Manchester United fans. Or I'll also throw in Liverpool and Arsenal as potential fan bases to be like that. Um, Shota Umino.
Let's see. So I'm never really sure what's public knowledge at this point. Um, he's a naughty boy, um, which is probably not a all right. Actually, that's actually probably a bad way to put it because what some people say he's done is actually pretty heinous, if it's true. Um, I don't know. Like it's hard because you hear like rumors about him, and some of them are out there about the way he treats women or
Yeah.
just pursues women.
For the sake of this conversation, let's just focus on performance.
Right. So like I guess what I'm getting at is that it's hard to like see how he's very regressive right now, and he just seems lost. He just seems so profoundly lost. Like he doesn't really know what's going on. They don't know exactly what to do with him. And it's hard not to think like, is this some sort of like interpersonal turmoil that's coming out under the camera? But when I take a breath and it's like, no, it just seems like he's in this period where he's not going to be pushed to the level of Suji right now, and maybe he's just sort of treading water himself. And he's somebody that I think they still value quite a bit because if you do look at his slate, which Samson pointed this out, he beat all the big guys in his block. Like he beat Evil, he beat Great Khan, and he beat Zack Sabre Jr. and he beat Shingo Takagi. As far as like like losing records, that's like the strongest losing record in the G1. It's like, in fact, looking at his win slate, it's kind of stronger than some of the guys who won, 5 or 6 matches.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I think that's a pretty clear indicator that they still believe in him and they still want him to do something. But I'd have to stay stock down because the crowds are turning on him. Like they're not buying it. And he's not coming across as authentic anymore right now. He just seems like he just is just profoundly perplexed. Like his backstage comments, which I think are a clear like sign and indicator of where somebody is mentally, he just doesn't seem as fervent with them. So, I mean, I don't know where they go from here, but I still believe he's got the potential to be a top guy amongst Suji and Uemura. We're just in a very weird point with him right now.
Yeah, I just think overall for me, I just find him to have a frustrating lack of consistency where
Yeah,
he has some moments where I'm like, oh yeah, okay, like Omino's going to be a top guy, he's got it, and then he has other moments where I'm like, ooh, this guy's like way not is not ready at all and isn't over and it's going badly. Um, and it's kind of hard for me to make heads or tails, especially when you add in some of the other stuff that you alluded to in terms of his reputation backstage and things like that.
right.
Um,
Yeah, it's just strange. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that he's regressed since New Japan Cup, and I think that's the best way to put it. Actually, what you said, like, there's just no way to really explain it. Like
mhm.
how, like he's just let himself go a bit. Got to get back on track, which I think he can, and I think he will. But right now, it's a bit rough.
How about Hanare?
Now, this is controversial because I'm gonna say stock up. However, I think he's really got in his own head about what a never match should look like, and I think he came into the tournament thinking that he has to have a never match every night, and he's trying so hard to do it that it does sort of become like like the facade is sort of out there where, I liked his matches coming into the tournament a bit. So, I know people are really down on him, especially because of that stuff. I think he's doing fine. I think he did a little bit better in this G1 than he normally does. He ended up with 8 points, which is about where a never champion usually ends up anyway. So I would say like a very light stock up.
Yeah, I think he's just like a good fit for the G1 in terms of just being a guy that's going to go out there, be probably has he probably has a ceiling if he's not. I guess he doesn't have a ceiling if he's wrestling Shingo Takagi, but in any other
Right.
situation, he kind of has a ceiling on how good he can be. But I feel like there's this real solidness to his work that's appreciated. I liked his match against Oleg Bolton. It wasn't really like
Oh yeah, yeah,
a great match, but like when the bell rang, it's like here are these two guys that just feel like legit tough guys, and they're gonna beat each other up for 10 minutes. And it just felt like proper in a way that there's a lot of stuff in this tournament where I'm like, oh, it's this guy, or like, oh, this guy's doing a gimmick, this guy's doing, whatever, gotta wait for interference or whatever. And then you have like, okay, here's Oleg Bolton and Hanare, and they're just gonna give each other like forearms and shit for 10 minutes. And it's
yeah.
gonna
It's
be pretty
awesome.
good. Yeah.
I mean, I'm fine with him because at least he has a vision of what he wants,
and
right?
it fits into what I expect to see in New Japan,
Yeah.
which for me as someone that watches like a lot of different promotions, I'm looking for New Japan to provide a certain thing for me. And I think what
Mm,
Hanare does is in line with what I feel like New Japan provides, which is like
I see.
mostly like no nonsense. Guy's going to be like work kind of stiff, come
Mhm.
across convincing, and the matches are going to be have a baseline of solidness to them.
Oh, it's interesting because pretty much at this point I'm just watching New Japan and DDT, and maybe I'll catch some Noah or Tokyo
Mhm.
Joshi Pro stuff on Universe. So I'm very actually interested to hear the perspective of somebody that does watch a lot of different promotions.
I mean, just yeah. I mean, it's just like part of. I think that's where some of my criticisms for New Japan get into is like it's like if I want to watch guys with like heavy gimmicks or stuff like that, like there's a lot of that in American wrestling. I think just like
Right.
my relationship with New Japan is like I didn't like what was going on in American wrestling, so I started watching New Japan. And so like I look to New Japan for like it seems ridiculous to say it. It's like Toa Hanare is like the mascot of what I my vision of New Japan.
Right.
It's just whatever Toa Hanare is. But
Well,
like
that's what he
it's
wants to be.
well, that's what I like when like I said, when I saw the Oleg Boltin Hanare match, which again was not like an amazing match that anyone's gonna remember. It's like a match of the year contender or anything like that. But there was just like a quintessential, like, yes, this is a proper G1 match. It's not Ren Narita with a push-up bar. It's not Shota Amino coming out with his weird reaction. It's not Jake Lee being a smart bastard or whatever. It's like here are just two guys giving each other, they're just gonna give each other forearms and like like run into each other at full speed, and that's like I gotta say, like it's a proper New Japan match, to me at
Yeah,
least.
and I
Yeah.
think, I think a lot of the stuff that you didn't like was somewhat present during those peak 2010 years.
Oh, it definitely
It's
was.
sure, and not that you aren't aware of that. It's just they could get away with stuff in the 2010s because the top was so strong. And I just think because the top tier, like you said, it's pretty much Naito right now, and then a bunch of sort of disarray floating underneath him.
Mhm.
And I think as they gradually sort of mold that into shape, I think that, those things will start accentuating like the positives again. But right now, we've just got to wait for that shape to take form. But that's an interesting perspective for sure.
How about El Phantasmo?
Stock down. I mean, I was higher on his G1 than, you know, I don't want to get too swayed by what they're saying in the Discord because they are very virulent about what they think.
No, I don't care
But,
about those people at all.
well, not to say it, but they for some reason they do not like you, and they
That's
don't
okay.
ever talk about me. But what are you gonna do? Anybody that writes for the website, I think they hate. So the elephant, I mean, they are somewhat right. Like the El Phantasmo stuff was ridiculous. Like reaching for a tag during a singles match to
Yeah,
show just how
like he has
profoundly
PTSD. He's
like the moroseness of like my friend. And it's like it's hard not to just think like, buddy, who gives a fuck? Even in kayfabe terms, you're finally free from this nonsense. And a tag team that nobody cared about. Which I mean, I actually kind of like their tag team, but like, you know,
it wasn't
he's
like this
gone.
iconic team. It's not like
No.
Ricky Morton can't make the tag to Robert Gibson because Robert Gibson's not there.
Right. And even there, like, I mean, they won the titles, right? But like they didn't really hold the titles for very long anyway. Like, it's another example of sort of this weird resetting that they did where everybody that won a title at Wrestle Kingdom kind of lost it at New Beginning, besides Naito. So like, they win the title at January 4th, and then they've lost it by February 11th, and that's it. So, yeah, I mean, it was some very overwrought melodrama, but he did also have that Takeshita match where they clearly just said we're going to go out and have the match of the tournament, and for me, they probably did. So, we know what he's capable of. We just please just let him go wrestle and just be El Phantasmo.
Yeah, I mean he told a story. Um,
He did.
he told a story in this tournament.
Well, most stories are bad, so there you go.
And yeah, maybe. Does he have any, can we dig up any, like, Polynesian ancestry for him? Because he might be a good fit in WWE with his, you know, over the top storytelling, like reaching for a tag that isn't there in the G1.
Well,
Um, so everyone
he's
knows, everyone knows he's sad. The
right,
announcers say it every
right,
single time. He says it in every promo. Everyone needs to know that he's sad.
right. If
And
there's any doubt that wrestling is ultimately theater, it's the play to the back row nonsense that has been sort of apotheosized right now. Um, well, I mean, he's an honorary Tongan.
that is true. And that's all it
They
takes,
did
man.
give it to him.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not old enough to go to WWE yet, but soon enough he will
Is
be.
is he older than you think? Like,
He's 38, I think.
yeah. So, what do you think? He's got 2 more years before it's 4-0.
He's 37, about to turn 38, so a couple more years. Also sad to think like they've wasted a lot of years of this guy's prime, where I thought he could have been a real major face in this
Yeah.
promotion, but
I mean, that's when I said I did like kind of a G1 breakdown,
the
like
pandemic and
halfway through the tournament. And my kind of thoughts on El Phantasmo was like, I think there was a point in time where he had like a real chance to be like a prominent babyface, not like a top guy, but like a
yeah,
never open champion babyface level guy. And I think that ceiling has probably been lowered.
yeah, yeah. It's unfortunate because I think
He,
he's got
he,
a high ceiling for me, but
he's also like I think like an inconsistent guy in terms of like he can go out and like that Takeshita match is a good example. Like he can go out and he can have a match where you're like this El Phantasmo guy, he's as good as anyone else in the world that wrestles his kind of style. And then he'll have other matches where you'll be like, okay, this guy's really whether he's dogging it, whether he's trying to get a story over. It's just he probably has like on his best day, he can look as good as someone like Takeshita or Will Ospreay, but
yes, he can.
that day is infrequent.
Yeah, and I
And
also think like whatever direction they're giving him, or just him in general, it just seems like he's always been a little bit uncertain about how to be a babyface in Japan as opposed
mhm,
to how he was in England. So, I mean, we got to figure it out now because I mean, I really feel like we've still got a number of solid years with this guy, and he's just so fucking talented. They just got to do something substantial with him and not so fucking stupid.
yeah, first thing he needs to do, he needs to get some merch that is like the Bullet Club logo, but it is in this like shape and style of the 1990s Vancouver Canucks logo. Because like when he
Oh,
first signed with used to have that like
yeah.
thing with when he was wrestling in England. And like when he signed with New Japan, I'm like, oh, we're gonna get like some awesome merch with like it's gonna be the Bullet Club, but it's gonna have the 90s Vancouver Canucks, like the black and yellow kind of theme. Like that's gonna be rad. And we've never gotten it. So that's a free
You
idea.
know, that's a good point actually. Like what's missing from El Phantasmo is the joy. Like he was just a joyful wrestler to watch. Like even during the pandemic, like remember when he was doing like that
The
long.
boot.
Yeah, and that was
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
We missed that. I miss
Yeah.
fun El Phantasmo.
No, he's a sad boy now.
Oh, what a bad decision.
Should come out and like he's like head banging, but he's doing it really sad and slow. Um, um,
God.
Zack Sabre Jr. I think we can all agree stock down, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's fucking boring.
Yeah,
Like jump, motherfucker. Can't you jump? I know you got an
yeah,
odd shape, but get at the top rope and take a dub. Yeah, no. I mean, we talked about him. Just,
yeah.
stock up. And like he just simply is like I mean, if we're talking about things that New Japan can do to separate them, as like I kind of feel like AEW and WWE have made them the template for what they
Mhm.
do. Or at least I think so. I haven't watched AEW in a couple years. But like Zack Sabre Jr. is just something that you can't find. There's just nobody who wrestles like him. Even guys who do grapple stuff, like he's just so frenetic. He just has no patience. He moves from one thing to another. And it's
Yeah,
just all this chain stuff. He's just totally unique.
he's a unique. That's exactly. He's a unique wrestler, and his what I love about him, especially in a tournament setting, is he is the only wrestler um that I watch on a regular basis that legitimately feel like his matches could end at literally any time. because he has so
Yeah.
many because of how many different types of wins he gets, whether through submissions or various different cool looking roll ups.
Mhm.
Like when he goes through the motions, he gets someone in a submission hold or he gets someone in a roll up. Like you feel like the match can legitimately end, and there's a level of excitement and can't look away to that kind of work that nobody else has. Because pretty much everyone wrestles the same style, where it's like the match isn't going to end until someone hits their finisher.
Right.
Um, and everything else is kind of like window dressing, which is I don't really necessarily have a problem with that. It's like just the accepted nature of pro wrestling pretty much across the board. And Zach is like one of the few
Sure.
very rare exceptions where that doesn't come into play. Where it's like Zach's on the mat, the match could end at any second, and it's been established time and time again. And it makes it so interesting. Like he'll win a match with a certain type of roll up one night, and the next night
Mhm.
he'll go for that same roll up again. And you'll be like, oh my god, he's going to do the same roll up again. He's going to win. And when the guy kicks out, it's like, oh, I really bought it there because he's established that he can win like that. Um,
Yeah, and you hear it in the crowds too.
yeah, oh
Like
yeah,
the, I mean, obviously he's been there for like 8 years in New Japan, and like I guess about 10 total. But like that, you saw it in the final. Like, you know, we've seen him get the flash submissions. Like he did it on Shingo, I think in 2021, where he just got that armbar, which was very cool. But like, there's almost nothing as dramatic as Zach sort of like, against Suji, he just like went from he has one limb, now he has two limbs, now he has three. And you hear the crowd just like the escalation as he's like, not slowly, but as he sort of like, carefully escalates the submission. And people get more and more excited in the crowd. But, then there was like this real big, climactic release at the end when he finally got the I guess it was a verbal submission, but like
mhm.
it works in this context. It works where he is.
Great Okan.
Oh, finally I can say stock up. Oh, I've been waiting for this since he was a
Yeah,
young lion. Like
it was a good
I
showing for him. Yeah,
if you're a young lion and you do gut wrenches, you're my favorite fucking young lion. So, and it never fails. Great O'Khan was the gut wrench guy. Oleg Bolton was the gut wrench guy. Oiwa was a gut wrench guy, and we know where he's coming. I mean, he's coming hard if they get him back. So, you know, I'm
was
glad.
Katsuya Kitamura not a gut wrench guy?
Oh, he probably was too, wasn't he? I can't
Yeah,
remember.
I mean,
It
it
was it
seems
was really.
impossible that he wasn't right.
I think yeah, I think him and Oka might have both been gut wrench guys. God, and what? I'm glad you mentioned that because, like, to me, again, I watch the backstage comments religiously, and you don't have to watch them, right? They're perfect supplementary material where, like, if you watch them, it enhances things like exponentially, but you don't have to watch them. Great O'Conn's has been amazing from the beginning. Like, he talks in this sort of manner, like he's some imperial minister or some like enlightened despot, and he uses like these like wild phrases or however they're translated, but like he also gives like that backstage comment last year that he made after Kitamiya died in the accident. it's it was like I really implore anybody to go back and find it or watch it because like I've never seen anything more affecting. Like he's just blubbering talking about like how much he admired that guy, and you look at that and you think like here's a guy that expresses any emotion. Here's a guy that's like so sincere and earnest, even though he's playing this, weird hodgepodge character from all points of Asian history. And like he's a guy who saved a young girl in real life from like an attacker and carried around the certificate he got from the police and stuff. And it's just like, what do you want from this guy? And they finally did it. And I thought, I thought he lived up to it. I thought his matches were great. And the big test is going to be against Naito soon. But I think he's changed his style a bit. He's added a bit more impact. He's upped the pace a bit. So I think we're finally getting it. I think it's finally happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a roller coaster from I'm like you, I'm a Okan enthusiast, and I loved him as a young boy. He
Yeah.
was there with Kitamura at the same time, but like he
Yep.
was very different than the other young boys. Like totally different look, amateur background, significantly larger than most of the other guys in his class.
Yep.
Um, and it's like, oh, this is great. New Japan's got this nice, new big hoss that they're gonna have toss around people. It's cool. then he went to England, and then he had and that's when the Okan gimmick came in, and it basically varies him in like how much is he doing the gimmick usually correlates with how high I am on him. And when he's really heavily leaning into the gimmick, I'm lower on him. And I thought when he came back, I was like, okay, he's disappointing. Then when he, maybe like a year in and started kind of moving up the card a little bit, I was like, okay, this guy, like I'm back on Okan. And then I was down on him again. And then when he was in the tag
Right.
team, I was like, oh, I'm kind of liking this Okan again. And then I was down on him again. And I thought last year I was like really down on him in the G1 because I thought not only did I not think he was like super good, but I also just got the sense like they've got all these other young guys like Suji and Uminu and
Hmm.
these guys that are coming back, and they have these interesting guys who are like Oiwa, who still was like young lion at the time. I was like, I have a feeling that Great Khan's in danger of being passed by because
Right.
he never really hit the level he needed to hit at, and now he's got younger guys coming up behind him. Um, but obviously, stock up this tournament for all the reasons you mentioned. I think he's wrestling with more urgency, which again I attribute to not relying so much like on like gimmick and doing like the spots and things like that
Hmm.
that he would do. Honestly, it's a big thing for me is ditching the pants.
Yes. Yes.
Like I get why he was wearing the pants, but and
And
it
they were
really
cool, but
yeah, and it shouldn't really make that big of a difference, but like
it does.
it's like yeah, and it was annoying, and it's just kind of annoying because it's like you have this guy who's a pretty rare talent in terms of like the New Japan Dojo of being like just his size and his ability.
Well, and you
And it's
mentioned it.
like,
He wasn't just like an amateur wrestler. He was the national champion.
yeah, he was a super high level amateur wrestler. And he like just his look, like when he was with his kind of like shaved, like I don't really know describe how to describe his hair when he was a young boy. It wasn't quite a shaved head. Um
He was balding,
yeah, it was but like he
hiding the
just
balding.
yeah, and he had like the cauliflower ears. He just looked totally different than everyone
Yeah.
else. And I was like, "Oh man, who's this guy? He's going to be a star." And then he was like saddled with this gimmick. And now he's still doing the gimmick, but like he just to me he's like, okay, he's back to just being a big convincing badass that's giving people overhead suplexes and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like you know what it reminds me of? It's like before Undertaker became Biker Taker in like 97, like 96, 97,
Mhm.
where like he's still doing like the Undertaker gimmick, but like he's basically just a guy, right? Like he's just a guy. Like he didn't become like I'm not a dead man thing, but like that sort of cool space where, the gimmick was like more,
Yeah,
even
it
though
was
obviously they did all the goofy stuff too, but like it was like this is just a guy now. He's just a wrestler who does this. Like we've normalized what he is.
the gimmick is just an aesthetic. It is not weighing in on
Yes.
his actual character. And it's interesting you mentioned that. I remember I was doing this is a long time ago. I was doing a Wrestle Kingdom post show on the Wrestling Inc. podcast back in my Wrestling Inc. days.
Uh-oh, the guys
Um
who don't wish Vince any birthdays, please.
it was it was not one of those guys. It was my co-host.
Okay.
But the guy I was watching, he was kind of like a casual New Japan fan, and I was kind of on as like the guy who watches New Japan a lot that knows like all the angles and stuff like that. And one of the things he mentioned to me was he specifically talked about Evil at the time, and he was like, I like with New Japan that like the guys come out with like entrances, and they might Evil, obviously his name is Evil, so it's kind of like this character, but when he gets out there
Right.
he's just like he's still just like a normal wrestler, and his character is not
Right.
overwhelmed by this gimmick. And
Yep.
like this guy who mainly watched American wrestling was like um he's like, I like that, that it's like these guys can have like characteristics and aesthetics that make it look cool, but they're still like just actual wrestlers. It's not being
Right.
overwhelmed by like doing magic or shit like that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good way to
Anyway,
put it.
so Jeff Great Khan's how about Great Khan's tag team partner, Jeff Cobb?
Well, I mean, for me, this is tricky because like I love Jeff Cobb. Jeff Cobb is probably one of my top five wrestlers right now. I think everything he does is incredible. But like I kind of feel like they should push him strong every G1. And he was sort of in the mix at the end, although, I kind of had to go through all this stuff for my, article leading into the final nights. And it's like, technically Jeff Cobb was alive, but like he really didn't have any realistic paths. And you knew he was going to lose to Suji anyway. Um, I'm gonna say stock even, but you know what? I'm gonna say slightly up. I just don't think anybody truly like he doesn't get enough credit. I feel. I feel like the company doesn't give him enough credit, and I feel like the work that he does is so just solid, and the fans eat it up over there. Everything he does, you know, he's like he's almost in like where Okan is, where you're just like wondering why aren't they trying a bit more with him, considering how much the fans like him, considering how unique he is too. And like he's never had an IWGP title match. He's never challenged for the title. And it's just baffling to me. But you know, it's another one where he's just sort of in the mix. So I'll say slightly up, but I wish it was more up.
Yeah, for me, Cobb, he seems he just I think he has a ceiling he seems to often be in second gear to me. It's very rare for me where I'm like, hey, Jeff Cobb has a match where I'm like, oh, that Jeff Cobb match was amazing. I think he's solid and provides a decent baseline, but he doesn't deliver at the highest level for me um, as an in-ring performer. How about Haruki Goto?
I mean, you've got to say stock up, right? I mean, the guy came in and you were wondering why he automatically got in, which I guess it was like, you know, the official reason, I guess, he's a former champion
Yeah, like
or
some
winner
years
of the
that's good
G1.
enough for him to automatically be in, but other years it's like, oh,
Right.
Goto, maybe he's not going to make it, and it's like, well, which is it? But I guess
Well,
it
especially
changes
that,
every year because the format changes every year now.
well, you know, it's fake. And sometimes they just let you know right off the bat. But, you know, with him, I think he hasn't really had even a really good G1 in a while. You know, he was fine during the pandemic, but those were the pandemic ones. He wasn't really great in these smaller blocks. So I wasn't really expecting much. I just expected sort of a meager, you know, like swan song. And, you know, lo and behold, he stole the middle of the tournament where everybody was interested in what he was doing. Um, you know, I mean, that Suji match was incredible. That was in what building was that? Because that was in Fukuoka. Um, you know, the guy was to the point where, you know, rational people were thinking, why not put the title on him? I mean, if we're, you know, especially if you're not going to go with Suji or the young guys. And, you know, it was a convincing argument. I mean, you know, I think he was, you know, the common thing about him was, you know, he's the gatekeeper of history, right? Where you can say like, you know, somebody of Goto's level didn't win the world title, which makes the world title mean you know more. And now it's just like, well, you know, why not give him a Nakanishi title reign? I mean, fuck, he's 45 and he was one of the top performers in the G1. So, you know, I think on every level he had an incredible tournament.
Yeah, I mean, if the winner of the G1 was just going to main event Kings of Pro Wrestling,
Oh, yeah.
like why couldn't Hiroki Goto have that with like the momentum coming out of the G1? Because I mean, there's a story, there's an obvious story to be told there of him being kind of really the last one of his generation that's in this G1. I guess him and Naito would be the two. Um, and he performs at a really high level, and he had a great tournament. And I mean, the G in G1 stands for Goto. So
Sure fucking does. I mean, he also has been hurt a lot the last few years, so maybe he's just a bit healthier now, but I mean, that guy just
yeah,
knows how to have a fucking match.
he looked great. You see some of these guys like, we're used to we know what Tanahashi looks like now. We know what
Yeah.
Naito looks like now. We know what Nakamura looks like now. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like sometimes I feel like I lump Goto in that I'm like, oh well, Goto's got to be like in that same class because he's just physically, but he looked great in this tournament.
Yeah,
Um,
he's really more like him and Segura, right? It's kind of like those guys.
yeah,
I'm assuming
maybe
Segura
that's
still looks good.
yeah, yeah. And Segura's like in his 50s now, I think at least.
Yeah, he was like older than all of them.
Yeah. Well, didn't he like not start wrestling until he was like 40?
He started late. Yeah, I think he was in like his mid or late 30s
Yeah. I mean,
when
well,
he came
pro
in.
wrestling. Obviously, he had
Yeah,
a
yeah,
long
yeah.
amateur career. How about Sonata?
Well, stock down. I mean, obviously, like last year he was the champion and he went undefeated.
And he
You
main
know,
evented Wrestle Kingdom.
and he did. And I don't know, like I looked through the matches and like, you know, him being that Jake Lee opening match almost feels like a fucking prank. Like those two guys, and like you know what Jake Lee's limitations are, and your first match against him is going to be Sonata. Like I appreciate the methodicalness of Sonata probably more than most. But he, I don't know, felt like he sort of moonwalked through this one, except for the Shingo match was incredible. Um, and the Zack match on the final night was awesome. But I mean, those two have some of the best chemistry of any pairing in the company. You know, it was just typical sort of floating Sonata where, you know, when you really like dissect it out of context, it's like, yeah, this is really high level work that he's doing, but it's not really captivating work.
Yeah, he's Japanese Randy Orton to me. He looks the part.
Well, watch your handbag.
He moves around the ring really well. He can do all of the stuff. He's a great athlete. He will occasionally have a match or something like that. We're like, man, this guy's great. Um,
Yeah.
but he doesn't have that high of a ceiling at this point, and it just feels like he has this really negative stigma. I think about being a guy that hit his ceiling and is now on the way back down, which is a tough spot to be.
Yeah.
Like
Although I
they,
kind of appreciate that because like if you know, I've really scoured through every G1 result the last few years for my stuff.
mhm.
And you do see this happen more than you've seen in recent years, where it's like, you know, Naito and because it's been so like this tetrarchy or whatever of like Naito and Ibushi and Okada and Tanahashi and whoever, where those guys never really drop down. Like an off year for them is like 10 or 12 points. But when you really look back at the history of the G1, you'd see guys like, you know, Riki Choshu won it in 96 going undefeated, but there's also years where Choshu like lost every match or won one match. Or like you'd see Tenzan, like they do this to Tenzan, who won a bunch of them. He'd like,
He's,
you know, win the G1 and then the next year he'd be like fifth out of sixth.
yeah, he's Mr. August or whatever.
Yeah, so if they do that to him, you know, so maybe it's just sort of return to that, or it could just be that, you know, Sonata had his chance and it's back to where he belongs.
Give me your hot take on the smart bastard, Jake Lee. Did you know he was a smart bastard? I feel like that was
After all,
I feel like that was emphasized more like than on commentary than like at least I'm listening to the English commentary, but like that was emphasized more than like any other character they've ever introduced ever in terms of like really trying to get this nickname that's not particularly good over.
oh, it's interesting to hear because I listened to the Japanese just for the ambiance, and I did hear them say "smart bastard" a number of times, but it didn't feel like they were relentless about it. There's
This
something
was
they were
like
relentless about, but I'll
sorry,
talk about later. But
I was gonna, this was like anytime he did anything in the ring, like he got out of the way of a guy making an attack, they'd be like, "Oh, there's a smart bastard, Jake Lee." Like it was
yeah,
pretty
he didn't
obnoxious.
really wrestle like a smart bastard for me, you know. And like Chris Charlton talked about how we were gonna be like flabbergasted and amazed by his speaking abilities and his backstage comments, when most of the time, like half the time he didn't give a backstage comment. The other time he has this like weird cadence where he sort of like stops after every sentence. You know, he has a cool like tone and timbre to his voice, and obviously like he has a at least a presence in front of like the backstage camera, but yeah, I'm just not compelled by him in ring. I'm not like I don't really like the knee to the gut thing, which is sort of like the turning point of all of his matches, and like it looks fine, but it doesn't really excite me. So there's like a disconnect there. But you know what? I'm gonna have to say stock up because this tag team with Gabe Kidd is compelling to me, and I am captivated by it. And you know, like I said, like there's something about watching wrestling where like kind of what you said before about like proper New Japan, where proper New Japan, you know, there are baby faces and heels, but it's not as pronounced in most cases.
Hmm.
You know, you'll have the outliers everywhere, but like there's just something about watching wrestlers who are teaming together, even if they're heels, just like being around each other. And Gabe Kidd is like super popular now, and I think this is like a genius decision because I think Jake Lee and that tag team is gonna be really fun.
Yeah, would you say he's like a smart bastard for that decision?
He doesn't wrestle like one. And like we'll talk about like gimmicks not matching it because Yota Tsuji doesn't wrestle like his gimmick either. But yeah, no, I guess it's like that thing where, like if you're a band, you're really cool if you have an English name in Japanese.
Hmm.
I just wonder what people think because it's like it's in English and he's saying it. Like, what is the average Japanese wrestling fan who's at like, Hamamatsu or like the Hiroshima Sun Plaza, like even know what the fuck that is?
Yeah, I'm not even sure I know really what it means, like in the context of a wrestler, being a wrestler.
And
Um,
honestly, when he was like steampunk monocle guy, that seemed like more of a like smart bastard presentation than this sort of like tall dude with Joshi pants that he is right now. I, but you know what? You know what? The mad bastards. I'm all about that.
yeah, that's okay. Uemura, I think. Well, actually, there's two takeaways you can have from this tournament.
Definitely stock up. Unfortunately, it's like, what are you gonna do with it? It's like, I guess like to torture an analogy, it's like, you have like stocks that are up and then the company just like folds. Because like from everything we hear, his elbow is in really rough shape, and this might be a while before he's back. But he's my guy. I think he's the chosen one. I don't think that Okada dropkick was random. Um, even beyond that, like when he was a young lion, he was the young lion that Jay White would pick on. And obviously, who's right next to Jay White as he's picking on him? Like, oh, you, yeah, blah, blah, blah. So I always sort of had a sense that they thought really highly of him. Um, Obviously, they've given him like the sparsest presentation you could give,
Hmm.
like doing him no favors, really pushing him weird. And obviously, like, you know, 6 months after he's back, he's in lemon eating competitions with Great O'Khan. And you're just wondering, like, what are we doing with it? But like, he seems like he's made for the G1, like that earnestness that he has, that sincerity that he has, and just like all those like rock solid fundamentals, which he then expanded, right? So he expanded on stuff. He added some stuff this G1. He was like the star of the first half of the tournament to me.
Yeah, if you were doing like a percentage increase in terms of like whose
Yes, yes,
stock multiplied the most, it would. I mean, it would have to be Uemura or Oleg Bolton in terms of just
sure.
where they went, and where they were versus where people see them now. The injury is like pretty devastating from a time perspective, but
Yeah.
maybe not. You know, maybe not the worst thing in the world, especially if they didn't have any follow up plans for him
Yeah, if he was just gonna
immediately.
flounder in the
Um,
fall, then
yeah, then this might give him some opportunity. When he comes back, people will maybe remember and think that he has some momentum. I agree with you that like he really hasn't been given anything to do until he made this G1 for the most part.
yeah,
Um, which kind of contrasts with the idea like, okay, do they really view him as this chosen one if they have like no seemingly have put in no creative effort into him at all? Um, but then you look at how he was booked in this G1, you're like, okay, well, clearly they see something in him. Uh, and maybe the return from injury, he'll get like, I don't know how long he's going to be out for this injury. It sounds like it could be, through the end of the year, which would probably put him at
right.
missing Wrestle Kingdom. But can't you see him coming back like at one of the events early in quarter one and just
Oh
being
yeah.
like, oh yeah, like really giving them a nice spark, as a maybe he's shows up and he's in the New Japan Cup and he wins the New Japan Cup, or maybe he shows up at New Year's Dash or something like that. I guess a lot of it depends on the nature of his elbow injury,
Yeah.
um, and when he would be able to come back. David
And he's
Finlay.
one thing on Uemura,
Mhm,
I think he kind of fits like what you want New Japan to be, possibly more than anybody though, because he's very pure. Like his wrestling is very pure and he's very pure. And I think you saw that connection can be made. It's just like Suji's very like pronounced and flamboyant and he's pushed hard. Shota
mhm.
Umino pushed hard, very flamboyant. Ren Narita given a gimmick where like, you boo on command. And he hasn't been given anything, so I think like it takes more time for him, but I think you saw like it's almost like they trust him to be able to get over with nothing. And he did. And I highly recommend they're doing this YouTube series called what is it? It's either New Heroes or Young Heroes um, on the New Japan YouTube page, and it's translated into English, and they're basically following around all the young guys. Yeah, New Japan's New Heroes. First episode was Yota Tsuji, and the second episode is Yua Uemura. You've got to see the Uemura episode. They follow him on like his promotional tour in Fukuoka, and it's insane. He does like 10 interviews a day, but he's very endearing. So, just like that supplemental stuff that can really get a wrestler over the top.
How do you feel about David Finlay? You kind of already alluded to this.
Yeah, David Finlay was my number 2 guy. I had him almost averaging like about 3.8, 3.9 a match, like almost 4 stars a match. Like I feel like David Finlay is a long project, or he was, and like so many things got in the way. So like he got sick during New Japan Cup, right? And had to bow out. He's disappeared at times when they were pushing him near the end of the pandemic. They had him win the Never title last year and then he lost it. But, another thing that I like to point out, he didn't join Bullet Club and take this role until like spring 2023. Like we're not even a year and a half into the Rebel. Like this is still kind of fresh to me. And, it was kind of rough because it definitely felt like he was figuring out what he wanted that character to be and how he wanted to wrestle. But I feel like he knows what he wants right now. He's going to power bomb people and he's going to do big moves. And he's just going to sort of, you know, jaw jack all match. And, I think his sense of like controlling the match has gotten significantly better. I just hope we can have some sort of momentum for longer than a few months with him. But no, I honestly think he's one of the best wrestlers they have right now. And I think he's made himself into that. But, it's kind of like a slow burn with him. So like it may just not captivate you. And if you're not sort of in from the beginning, you just might not find a way in. But I think he's doing things to make his matches less than like I think like he only worked as like a 15 to 20 minute slow burn. And now I think he's like able to do a 10 to 12 minute match and have it be good. And I think there is a real roughness to his style right now that I don't think a lot of people are doing. So yeah, I think stock up for him for sure. At least on my end.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like he obviously like that power bomb really got over in this tournament. That was like
Yeah,
became like a
power bomb,
thing.
right?
Yeah. Um, I'm not as high on him as you. To me, the issue with me with Finley is something that maybe isn't entirely under his control. If you were to ask me like David Finley as a wrestler, like just as a pure talent,
Hmm.
like how would you rate him? I'd be like, like 7 out of 10, like pretty good.
Sure.
Um, I just I think like he's the leader of the Bullet Club. He's not at the same level. He's not close to the same level as the previous leaders of the Bullet Club,
Right.
and it just kind of comes across as like a bad message from New Japan. It's like New Japan is so far from its peak that David Finlay is the leader of the Bullet Club when he used to be like AJ Styles and Kenny Omega, or Jay White,
Right.
guys with the
I think he's
abs.
closer to Jay. I think he's closer to Jay White, but it is
Yeah,
the message taken. Like,
so
he's definitely
that's kind
not
of
that the other one, right?
yeah. So it's kind of like out of his control. Where I feel like it's not even like he's pushed too hard because he's not pushed as hard as those other guys were.
No, no, he
Um,
really isn't.
So it's not like necessarily a consequence of his push. It's more of just like it's hard. It makes him feel kind of second rate, even if as a wrestler he's pretty good.
Right.
And that's kind of beyond his control. I get that. Um,
Sure. And to your point too, like I'm not saying that he felt that way. I'm saying like I think he's improved dramatically since like late last year.
mhm.
Whereas like what you're saying, like AJ Styles becomes New Japan or Bullet Club leader and instantly he's, revitalizes his career. You
Yeah.
know, Kenny
Well,
Omega
he's
takes over and instantly he's great. Like Jay White even was able to take over, and like it took David Finlay longer, but like you can't be thrust into that position and then take your time figuring it out.
yeah, and
But that's
like you
what they
said,
that's where they put him.
yeah, there's been some stop and start kind of things with his career,
Yeah, yeah,
really pretty much since he started in New Japan. Like,
yeah.
because he probably started right around the same time as Jay White.
I think so.
Um,
Yeah.
and think of how like much has happened in Jay White's career compared to relatively what has happened in David Finlay's career. Um, and he's always been internally rumored to about to be going to WWE. But yeah, like I think he's pretty good. Like when you saying like you have him second in the tournament based on average match rating, which isn't you saying he's the second best wrestler in the company, just happened to be what his out performance was. That's like pretty shocking to me. Um, but obviously, I guess when I think about it, I can see how you got there. Like he did have a lot of above average matches in this tournament, even if I was maybe a little bit lower on them than you.
Yeah, like if I was like, obviously I think anytime you do numbers, it's like, all right, this is what the numbers say, but now it's time to put a human element to it. And,
Yeah, no, I know it's
like,
interesting. It's interesting. Yeah, like it's interesting you got there. Like I said, it's different than you saying like, oh yeah, I think he's better than Shingo, or I think he's better than Konosuke Takeshita.
right.
But the fact is, at the end of the day, you looked at your match ratings, you're like, wow, David Finlay's second highest. That does say something beyond just your own personal thoughts. Like you're kind of getting away, even though it's your own ratings, you're kind of getting away from personal bias by just saying like, look,
Yeah.
he had a really strong tournament.
Yeah, and I think like for him, I mean, obviously I think like obviously nobody else probably has him that high, at least as far as the numbers go. But I'd be surprised, like I wouldn't be surprised if like when people looked at, if they keep track of their numbers or if they thought about the numbers, if he wouldn't be higher than people expected him to be, which, obviously then you'd say like, obviously like I'd even put Gabe Kidd above him or some other guys. But I do feel like it does say something for like his progression that, as somebody who isn't really taken as seriously in the ring that he probably should be for somebody in his position, it's getting quite a bit better. And he is only 31, so he's a lot younger than you'd probably think with how long he's been around. So, it might be something just to keep an eye on that, at least just like keeping an open mind on David Finlay, I guess. Which I think a lot of people are, but like I think be ready to give him a little bit more, authenticity than he has right now.
Mhm. How about his little cohort there, Gabe Kidd?
Oh, this is really tricky because it's like, who do you say has the most stock up? And Gabe Kidd is a very strong argument for the most stock up, and probably a good example of why, like, unless you advance, your standings don't really matter.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you could get a
and this
pin
is
if you pinned a champion or something like Okan pinned Naito, so he's getting that title
right.
match.
And keep in mind, if anybody goes to the Wikipedia page, I spent Friday at the mechanics. Well, got the day off work. I actually put in footnotes for every like unbreakable tie for on the G1 Climax page, just so like I know next year, like no, this person isn't actually sixth place. They're tied for sixth place. And Samson told me I was an idiot, and I probably am. But because it doesn't really matter what place you are. Like Gabe Kidd was technically eighth in A block, and nobody would have him eighth if you were just ranking people like from the block, unless you like truly despise him personally. Like I actually, believe it or not, had the Gabe Kidd Evil match from night one at 4.5 stars. And I went back and watched it, and I probably wouldn't give it 4.5 stars now. But like in the moment at Edion with that crowd and just the way that those two fed off each other, like, it's like for all the things people say about Dave and stuff, like some of the most overrated matches that Dave's ever overrated are WWE matches that he attended live. It's just like when you're in the moment, like, you capture that moment. And like Gabe Kidd is Gabe Kidd showed that he is world title level. Like he can reach that level because the crowd response to him is, it's on par with Suji, I think. And I think it's just going to grow bigger. And he
Mhm.
just has like an aura to him. Like he's a madman. if you didn't know.
Yeah, I think Gabe has this kind of intense physicality, like
Yeah.
to compare him to Finley, like that Finley doesn't have, which gives Kid a much higher ceiling, especially in a company like New Japan. Like
Mhm.
Gabe feels like a tough, badass New Japan wrestler that like if he were to go somewhere and wrestle somebody else like outside of New Japan, like he would just stiff the shit out of that person, and that person would be like,
Oh yeah.
"What the fuck is this guy doing?" And I like
Well, you know,
and I like that. Um,
well, he did almost kill somebody this year, but
yeah, yeah, um,
he paid for it.
yeah. Um, but I like just there's an element of danger to him.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The instability, both in the unsureness of how much of it is a work, how much of it is a shoot, how much of it is a
Hmm.
mixture of both, adds like this really kind of crazy element to his matches where it's like I literally have no idea what this guy is going to do, um,
Yeah.
which makes them more exciting.
Hmm.
Uh, I am in the camp like he's got to tone it down, like he's got to tone the shtick down, and like
He has a bit,
right. And I guess
little
like
bit.
people discuss this like it's like a fine line, like oh you got to go right up to that line, and it's great work. But then it's you just go a little bit over and it's ruined. I don't really get that. Like I just need him to be like cut some of this stupid shit out. Like I know this wasn't in the G1, but there's a match where like he's like beating up. He has a singles match to beating up a guy, and then he's like, "I'm gonna go like into the crowd, go behind the railing, and give like the timekeeper a brainbuster on the floor, for no reason because I'm a madman." And
Right.
it's like, can we not do that? Because I feel like that's something you can clearly not do because that's like stupid fake bullshit. Where it's like, if a guy was actually in a wrestling match, he wouldn't take the time to then go assault a random person just to prove that he's crazy. Um, that's the kind of stuff I want to see him get rid of. Um, but outside of that, like he has pretty much as much potential as anyone else in this company.
Oh sure. And like I don't think like I enjoy it, but like I don't think it necessarily like takes away from what he does. It's just some weird thing that he does that like it may amuse you or wouldn't, but like I think like he is excessive about it. Obviously, I probably think that's a direction. I don't think just naturally he would scream his catchphrase into the microphone or the camera as often and as relentlessly as he did without some sort of, direction to do that. But
Knowing
it has worked in spite of that.
knowing New
And I think he's
Japan,
toning it down a bit.
yeah, I feel
Huh?
like Jado and Gato are just like backstage when they see him. They're just like madman, 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 and like he's like, okay,
Yeah, no subtlety. No
yeah,
subtlety.
um,
And I think you're right. I think there's like a level of like capriciousness to what he does where it does feel dangerous. And obviously like he did seriously hurt somebody this year and he paid a price for it because like I mean we're talking about Mad Men. I mean, I don't think I mean obviously like a lot of people have talked about it. I just don't think we can talk enough about how insane Hanare is. For basically like his brain's falling out and he just sort of gets like wrapped up with gauze probably just so he can go fucking cream Gabe in the ring with that chair. And then going out for drinks afterwards too. I mean, holy fuck.
yeah,
But, I think like Gabe is somebody who's very unpredictable. And I think you're right. I think like him and Finley go for that intensity, but Finley goes for like sort of like this composed, smoldering version of it. And, Gabe just evokes a more visceral reaction.
yeah. I feel like Gabe is someone. If you were showing someone New Japan or taking someone to a show who was unfamiliar with New Japan or maybe pro wrestling altogether, and they saw like David Finlay and Gabe Kidd, I think Gabe Kidd would grab them a lot more. That doesn't necessarily mean that Gabe Kidd is better than David Finlay, but I just think Gabe has something that's so much more easily marketable and
Hmm.
uh, appreciable, and he feels like a pro wrestler in a really fundamental way in terms of like how he carries himself. That that not like it's not just to compare him to Finley, like most guys don't have.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
and I think with him, it's also like he's doing it all because when he's in between the ropes, I feel like his matches just themselves, when they finally get in the ring, are still really good. Like he's just
mhm.
an awesome wrestler on top of that.
Yeah, like I said,
Like he
he's
doesn't
got
need to leave the ring.
yeah. I mean, he is as a worker, he's really good. Like he's got his stuff looks good. His
It really
he hits
does.
stiff. He can sell. Like he's
Oh my
not.
God.
Yeah,
His
he's like sometimes these guys that kind of carry themselves like Gabe can sometimes they can be kind of selfish in the ring. I don't get the sense with him
right.
like that.
Oh no. Well, I was just talking about this to John and Chris. You know who he reminds me of more than anything? And I think it's kind of obvious, especially when you talk about his selling. He's fucking Terry Funk. Like if you watch his selling, it is classic Terry Funk selling, especially when he's doing like the wobbles or like the
Mhm.
comedy stuff. He's fucking Terry Funk. He's the closest thing we've got to it right now. And I think
I
he's
don't
just
know.
going to get
What
better.
about Dory Funk? He's still wrestling.
Speaking of Onita, holy fuck.
I don't know. You said the
God
closest thing
bless
to
him.
Terry Funk, but Dory Funk's still out there.
That's true. That's true. He took a fucking baseball bat, those gimmick baseball bats. I love it. Onita is just
Yeah,
the best.
yeah. I will not watch that match, but like, and it was probably
No, no.
ultimately bad that it took place like from like a humanity stand perspective. But I saw that on my someone uh told me about that yesterday. I didn't even know it was happening, and I was like, I'm glad. I'm glad Dory Funk Jr. still had a match, even though it probably wasn't a good idea.
No, and teaming with Nishimura, who's like kind of sick. So
Kind of sick, wasn't he? Like in a coma like a month ago.
yeah, like he's well the cancer and it's just well, I mean, I guess it's two ways to look at it because like on one hand, I'm like, why should these guys be in the ring? But on the other hand, I do kind of think like it's a nice thing for them to, get out there and work together again, especially when
Yeah,
one of them is kind of in rough shape right now, just
yeah.
beyond like age. So yeah, that happened.
How about Takai Watanabe?
Um, he's like he's like impervious to analysis, right? And
Yeah, right.
criticism. Like
He's
how do you judge him?
remember when he was just Watanabe?
Well, yeah, I do, and I also remember when he was just evil before this. I was always sort of underimpressed and disappointed with him. Like I felt like coming into the pandemic, he was a very disappointing wrestler who underachieved. Like especially like in the 2018 G1 where he was in the block with Tanahashi and Okada, and I thought he's the guy that's going to make the move. And he didn't. Like he was just there, and I just never thought it was going to happen with
What
him.
year did he beat Okada in the G1? That's my favorite match of his of all time.
Uh, Good question. It wasn't that year. I know that for sure. Um,
Because that to me was like a ceiling match for him. It's like, you know what, this guy's really good. And he's had moments here and there throughout his career where he's kind of, he's had a main event of a you mentioned the match he had against Gabe Kidd on the first night of the G1. Like he has these moments where he's like, ooh man, this guy's really good, but
oh,
he's weighed down by the stuff we mentioned with Red Narita. I think at
interesting
least.
you bring that up. 2017 actually.
That was yeah, that was I knew when you said 2018, I'm like, didn't he beat Okada in that G1? But that was the year before.
No, you know what? Now that you've the memories are kind of coming back to me. Yeah, that's why I went into that G1 thinking like Evil's gonna make a big leap here, and he didn't. And then all the House of Torture stuff developed, and I would say this. I was very upset at the beginning of the year because I feel like House of Torture works to a certain level. Like Ota Ward Jim, maybe even Eddie on. But once you get past like a 5 or 6 thousand seat place, which is obviously very good, but like you're not gonna like run Ryogoku with them, right? And obviously we found that out against Sonata because it's like they did not draw very well at Ryogoku. In fact, at Destruction for that fucking lumberjack match, they drew 5,000, which obviously, it's usually a down period anyway, but it's like, you know, they work to a certain level. Like you put them in Korakuen and it's usually very good. You know, but most of the time it just feels like, they do something very dramatic, very obvious, some sort of clue to the crowd to boo for 3 or 4 seconds, and it feels very Pavlovian. But Evil, I think, has transcended that a bit because he's definitely leaned more into sort of the comedy aspects of this. Um, and like he's sort of become this delusional heel character where I don't think he was necessarily like totally this overt about it, where like he literally thinks he's the president now, or he literally thinks he can just make his own matches, or he's like forcing Abe to read nonsense before a match. So I think it works on that level. I think his wrestling is actually better than it's ever been. Like, bell to bell, when he's actually wrestling, I think he's gotten much, much better
Yeah,
than
I
he
think he's
was.
probably
Like,
I think he's probably underrated, like, in terms of bell to bell, and it's, like, kinda like the company's own fault for the reason he's underrated
yeah.
because of the matches are all structured in a way to make you not think about his in-ring work, but I've never really had a problem with him, like, as a wrestler.
Mm,
We gotta speed along here because I do have to wrap
sure.
this up. Uh, last 4 guys here. Yoda Tsuji, we already kinda talked about him a lot.
I stock up.
My one take on Yoda Tsuji is that I don't love the Gene Blast as a finisher. There's too many guys who do
Thank you.
spears as finishers. I never wanna
Fucking
see another
thank you.
spear again. Like, it's like the
Well,
most
and
overused
also,
finisher in wrestling.
he doesn't even do the best one in the company.
No.
Like Hanare does the one where he lifts. Like other guys do it better than him or as good, and like it's just a lame finisher. It's just not a fun finisher. I think he could, do better. I think it's just kind of like when he did Uemura's finisher, which is also a bad finisher, but that was like a really cool moment in the semifinal against Finley. Even though I kind of felt like the Finley match was a bit absurd because he like basically ate every big move and finish that Finley had, and then just like just beat him. But regardless of that, the crowd liked it. You know, I feel like he's like I don't know what his character's supposed to be because he's sort of like this like monster guy, like Gojira thing, but like he's always doing that like disingenuous smile. But then it turns out like he is very sincere. Like in the back, he always gives like these very like poignant backstage comments, especially about Uemura, even when they were feuding. So I think he's just an example of like if you have a cool look and you like know what you're doing and you're pushed to a certain level in a very like strategic way, you know, it just works. Even if like all the elements don't really fit together, it just works. He's just a guy that it's always going to work for.
Mhm. Konosuke Takeshita, the only man in this tournament who is not officially a New Japan wrestler.
Before the tournament, when I did the preview for B Block, I said he was the best wrestler in the world. Uh, and he went out and showed it. Simple as that. Like, I legitimately think he is number one. I'd put him above everybody.
Mhm.
And I think, like, his age, because he's like 29 or 30. He's got that DDT background, which does, like, produce, like, really great wrestlers who have a lot of eclecticism. Like, he's done the comedy stuff,
Yeah,
he's done the big match stuff.
versatile, yeah.
And yeah, I just think like he came in this tournament and showed, you know, hopefully like this is what the finished product of all the new guys are going to be. But he had a big like head start on all of these guys. And like he just showed like this is what you want these guys to be at. Like he's just simply the best. He can do everything.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say, um, he's come in here and he's kind of exposed New Japan's star development system a little bit in
He
terms of,
could
like
have, but I think that could have happened, and I was worried that was going to happen. But I think they stepped up in especially Suji in response to him because he could have ate them up easily.
yeah, well, I think it's also that's, like, coming from a real negative perspective in terms of, "Oh, Takeshita came in, he showed everyone else up." I'm like, "Well, like, he's like Konosuke Takeshita." Like, I don't think it's necessarily New Japan's an issue that they don't have someone that's as good as Konosuke Takeshita because, like, nobody is as good as Konosuke Takeshita.
No,
It's
well, and
like
they also like Yuya Uemura isn't in that place yet. Like it would be
no.
like if Konosuke Takeshita came into the G1 in 2018.
Yeah,
Like
and he's
Takeshita was great, but he wasn't this yet.
yeah, and he started, in a promotion that was willing to push a teenager. The
Yeah,
stakes of pushing a teenager for DDT were not were very different than like the stakes of like New Japan pushing a teenager in terms of like
right.
when you're
Of
starting out
course.
with like a smaller promotion, you can take more risks in terms of who we're gonna push on top. Um, but yeah, I mean yeah, I said halfway through the tournament that I think I said he was the best Japanese wrestler in the world. Um, he's as good as anyone else in the world. And you really for anyone that's actually watched him, like, I would find it hard to believe that they would disagree with that assertion. Like,
No, no,
I've
no. I
I've
mean,
almost
he
heard
just like
I
yeah.
can't even really recall ever seeing I'm around some cynical fucks. I can't even remember seeing some, like, slander of Konosuke Takeshita. Um,
No, he
the
he just
last
has a feel. He really
yeah,
does.
last 2 guys, Shingo Takagi,
Oh, and by the way, one more thing on Takeshita. During the tournament, he wrestled at Peter Pan and had a really great match with Masato Tanaka.
just on the
So
side. Yeah, just on the side.
just on the side.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a great match too.
yeah. So, Shingo,
See, this is where stock up, sucks down is tricky
yeah,
because
because
Shingo's like
He's
he's
Shingo.
fucking Shingo Takagi. I said it on the Omakase, and I'm saying it here. We got Ishii in the Hall of Fame, and like I'm fine with the idea that the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame is basically just like so like it's drawing and maybe something else. So Shingo, like I think Shingo could probably have a draw case too, but like like the floodgates opening because Ishii gets in and now every work rate guy's gonna get in. It's like fine. Like I don't think that. It's just special cases, and
Yeah,
Shingo's a special case.
not every work
Shingo's a
rate
special
guy.
case. Like he's so far like a historical work rate guy that he's just got to get in. And like he's still doing it. Like I thought I was kind of down on him coming into this G1 because I didn't really like the Hanari match. I thought that they just did the no sell spot too much. And it seemed like he was sort of aimless, but he knocked it out of the park again in
Yeah,
every way.
well, that's why I think I would say for the purposes of this exercise, stock up in terms of I feel like he was kind
Yeah,
of
okay. I'll say
I
stock
felt
up.
like yeah, I mean his performances to me are always top notch, but I do feel like his performance and how he was kind of protected in this tournament and put into the semifinals and things like that um were really excellent for him because he's kind of in a weird place because he had that world title run, but it was really during like the
Dog
pandemic
days.
and just
Yeah.
like it wasn't proper in any way. And it's
No,
kind of like disappointing that that's the time they decided to go like all the way with Shingo.
I
Um,
know.
and who else in the ring in this company is like even close to Shingo's level? Like in this tournament, I thought easily the 3 best wrestlers in this tournament. I will hear like almost like for me, super obvious were Zack, Konosuke, Takeshita, and Shingo.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I think that's probably consensus.
and just like who are the actual best wrestlers in this tournament.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's not like Shingo isn't over. It's not like the crowd doesn't buy him as a legit guy. So um, there's nothing really
I'd be
stopped.
interested. I gotta talk to John about this because I'm very interested in what the Japanese fan perceives him as because I perceive him at this point like, I mean, obviously Naito is the leader of Lij, but he does kind of feel like a almost level of like the top guy faction leader. Like it feels like he's at that level. He just has like the ultimate leader in his group above him.
Yeah, well, like he was like I mean, again, it was during the pandemic, but he was the world champion. Like
Yeah,
he's like
for a long
he
time too.
yeah, like he's a legit top guy in the company, I guess. And so it's kind of yeah, it is. I mean, and I also think like the dynamics of Lij are a little bit different than like the dynamics of your maybe some of the other groups
Yeah,
in the company in terms of who like
yeah.
the top guy is. Um, and lastly, he just came up. Last guy is Tetsuya Naito. Um, had a divisive tournament, I would say.
Yes, he did. I would have to say stock down. Um, if I could
Is it
Jay Billis it up here,
is it because he
he's
can't
got
hit his
no.
finish?
Yeah, that's kind of a big deal. He's got, and it's not even just his finish. There's a reason why he can't do his finish anymore. Like I said, let me Jay Billis it up here. He has no burst. There's no burst in his legs anymore. he needs a rest because he can't get over the top rope consistently to do the combination cabron, which he doesn't even do it any like every match anymore because like he was stumbling over the top rope. Like he just doesn't have the lift. So like, obviously it's a move where the guy taking it has to basically lift him over them, but it's not dead weight. Like Naito has to sort of get to a certain point where they can get him. And he can't reach that every time anymore. And obviously, like if there's communication issues, like, him and Jake Lee seem to be sort of slightly misaligned, like not like a disaster, but like it seemed like they were a bit not totally aligned with each other. It
Oh,
becomes a real catastrophe.
yeah. I think Naito and Jake Lee was like the worst big match I can recall seeing in quite a long time.
And I felt bad for him because it's like it wasn't like, oh, these guys are incapable of doing it, or I don't even think they can have a good match together. It just seemed like
No,
they
it just
just got like misaligned
yeah,
somewhere and
it
took
just
them a while to get back on track.
it just fell apart. And sometimes people take these things like too personally. And I'm like, how could you say Naito had the worst match you've seen in years? And it's like, it's not like I'm a huge Tetsuya Naito fan. I voted him for the Hall of Fame every year until he got in. I think as an in-ring worker, he's really underrated throughout his career in terms of the way people talk about
Sure,
him.
he's an all-time
Um,
great.
yeah, yeah, legitimately. So like I'm not by no means like a Naito hater, but it's like that match was a complete disaster, and I don't know how anyone can
Yeah.
say otherwise. Like it
No,
just is what it is. And if you love Naito, you can just blame Jake Lee. That's a cool spot to park blame. It's just yeah, I
no, I
mean
mean it's deflating, right? Because it's like he's not Tanahashi level, and I honestly feel like he just needs a little bit of rest.
yeah.
I mean, he like his legs are totally shot right now.
Mhm.
And honestly, like talk about the eye, like he's had so many surgeries on his eye that they can't do that anymore. Like once it goes awry again, he's done. He can't have that surgery again. Like, and this is partially him. Like I think it's him just wanting to be on every show, so he doesn't take tours off, and he's on tours that he probably doesn't need to be on. I mean, even then I still had a bunch of his matches at like 4 stars or about that.
Yeah, yeah, like, I was gonna say, like, his first 2 matches of the tournament, like, versus Shingo and versus Zack were, like, in a vacuum, like,
Yeah,
really good matches, but he did not look good in those matches,
right.
which
Well, at
was,
the
like
end for sure, right?
yeah, which was, like, this kinda I mean, the Zack match was a little bit better because it didn't rely on, like, explosiveness, but he was in there with Shingo, and Shingo's wrestling Shingo's match, which, he's hitting the
Right,
ring, and, there's a lot of bumps and athleticism that's required in a Shingo match, and it's just, like, kinda it was almost kinda cruel to see Naito out there. And look, there's
right.
pressure on him, like we talked about, he's easily the biggest star in the company, he's easily the biggest draw in the company.
Oh yeah,
The roster doesn't have the depth of star power that it had, even, last year. Um, so there's a lot more pressure for him to be on these shows, and it's just a tough spot to be in because, like you said, he's physically with Tanahashi. I feel like there was a really gradual decline, really dating back to like
right.
that bicep injury he never had surgery on, where
Yep.
he went from being one of the best wrestlers in the world to being like pretty good to being like, oh, he can summon it once in a while to being just kind of like, okay, this is he's now like full blown like late stage Muda kind of stage of
Yeah.
his career, where
Can't run
like
to a mount.
yeah, where like none of his bodies work, um, none of his body parts work. And with Naito, it felt like just because like the exertion, it felt like it kind of happened a little bit faster, which is a little bit troublesome. And but it's just and so it's like the issue with Naito is like I don't want to put all this like blame on him. It's kind of like that's like a mean thing to say because he's out there working hurt and busting his ass.
Right.
But when you are the biggest star in the company, when you're the world champion, when you're headlining all these shows, like your in-ring performance is going to be criticized.
Sure.
And that's just the state of where he's at now. Um they're gonna I mean he'll get more rest because he's not working the grind of a G1, but they're gonna need him over the next 6 months and probably
Right.
beyond that. Like um we'll wrap up with this because I do need to watch this Wembley Stadium show. It starts in four
Sure.
minutes. But real quick, Gato was just fired. Hypothetically, Gato was
Oh, can I just
fired.
say what? Sorry, I know I don't want to keep you from that. 1 minute just on the you mentioned
Yeah.
the attendances before.
Mhm.
I just want to say this because I've done a ridiculous amount of work this week, like literally going over seating charts and like square footage and like figuring out like not the like the website attendance that you see on these Japanese venue sites, but like what I think the real capacity is for wrestling. So
Mhm.
like this year they did about 48,000 something. And last year they did 53. So they're down 5,000. Just to give a little bit of insight to that though, the capacity was way down. So like last year, at least by my calculations, somewhere in the range of 95,000 people total capacity, all the venues combined. And this year it was about 80,000. So they did quite a bit better capacity, but they did run smaller venues. So ultimately they're down like a half, 50% of what they were in 2019. But just a little bit of nuance to that. It's still down and still down from last year, but the capacity is a little bit better looking.
Yes. While you were talking, I was able to pull up the pay-per-view on my phone, so we can keep going a little bit longer. Um, but yeah,
Sorry.
no, I would say like from an attendance perspective, um, I would consider this like a big success. Look, you lose your biggest established star, or at least Okada, like on the same level as Naito,
Hmm.
um, and you lose Osprey, who's maybe your biggest, rising star or younger star. It's like your attendance isn't going to be the same. Um, So I would consider that like a success. I would say like the position where they are business wise is fine. It's not
Yeah,
like record setting or anything like that, but I would say it's
they're producing
fine.
revenue.
Yeah. And when you consider the losses in terms of talent, and maybe some
Sure.
of those losses in terms of talent are related to like revenue, and like the company's not making the same amount of money, they can't financially compete with other companies. And I mean, there's a whole,
Sure.
it's more the American companies have so much money that it's hard even for like peak New Japan to compete financially. Um,
Well, and also like if you really want to hang your hat on something optimistic, and I do think like this is a key point, um, Zebio Arena Sendai, I think is one of their key arenas going forward. I think it opened at the beginning of the pandemic, so they've only been running it since 2020. And it's about a 4,000 seater. And I estimate they could probably fit about 3,500 in there. They just did their best number at that arena, which they've run about 7 or 8 times. Like this is a new like rotation venue. And that number, which is their best in that arena, was headlined by Suji Uemura. So I
mhm.
think that's a very promising, like that was one where it's like, okay, I think this might be working.
Yeah, no, for sure. I noticed that too when that match took place, that drew really well, which is really
Yeah,
important. Because
especially
it
those two,
does.
right?
Yeah, well, when we talk about like there's a pressure on Naito to be on all these shows because of his drawing power relative to everyone else on the roster. Um, And if you can take that pressure off of him and he can maybe take some time off, which, he's a psycho, he might not take that time off anyway. Um, you know,
Yeah,
that,
a madman.
that we you talk the mentality is just different there. We talk about, Hinare, gluing his head back together.
Right.
Tanahashi, I mentioned, Tanahashi's career, I think the downfall of him physically came from when he tore that bicep. I forget what year that was. It's probably like what, like 2017, 2018. Remember when he tore the
It's in
bicep
that range.
and then he like worked the
Yeah,
whole G1? And I think that was
worked the
like,
G1, right?
he had a huge wrap on, and I don't think that wrap like ever came off. Like I think that was like the beginning of the end. And that was during a
You
time where
know,
there was like
yeah.
that was
Sorry.
during a time where there was a lot more depth to the roster in terms of like,
Right.
Tanahashi, you might maybe could take some time off so you don't have to uh kill yourself, but the mentality is different. Um
It's funny. I mean, I'm sure you remember the match with Kenta at Wrestle Kingdom where he went off the ladder and did the high fly
yeah.
blow. Neither one of those guys has been the same since that match. I mean, Kenta was already sort of broken down, but it's been bad, and it's kind of for both of them, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard to tell like was that match like really the end for them, or is it just like their bodies were, I mean, both of those guys were already trending. I mean, Kenta, it's hard to tell. Kenta's body broke down, and
Yeah, he's all gimmick now.
Yeah, and I don't know if Kenta has the same kind of spirit that like Tanahashi has in terms of like Tanahashi, like if he physically could, would really, 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 really want to go out there and have like an amazing performance. I don't can't necessarily say the same about Kenta.
Yeah, Kenta just wants to have cool backstage comments, which he is the best at, but the ambition in ring seems to be
uh,
significantly diminished.
so my hypothetical uh, here is Gato is fired and you were
Yep.
hired. President
Oh, sweet.
Tanahashi comes in and is like, Jay
Ugh.
Michael, I've been reading all of your write ups on voiceofwrestling.com, and I want you to have the book. This I kind of want to get this away. I don't want you to necessarily fantasy book a whole angle because I don't really like fantasy
Mhm.
booking, but just from an exercise perspective, what would the main event of Wrestle Kingdom be? Now that like with the knowledge that like it's not going to be Zack,
Yeah.
or Zack is not going to wrestle Naito for the title at Wrestle Kingdom like we thought
Right.
when he won the G1.
Well, number one, they're a fucking black company, so I would absolutely say no. Number one, and by the way, I don't want to any of that misconstrued. That means like a toxic work company in Japan. They definitely say that. I mean, the first thing I would do, I would fire Kikuchi for being a dickhead
I was
and a
gonna say you're gonna
bureaucratic
clean
bully.
up. So the first thing you're gonna do is clean up everyone.
Bureaucratic bully dickhead, and he can go. But I mean, honestly, so we're saying like I take the job after this G1, so I'm inheriting all of this.
Yes, I just want to know like
Okay.
who would you like? I guess I like who do you want to think? What do you think would be the best decision, all things considered, balancing knowing you need to draw, knowing that you maybe want to set something up for the future. What would be like the program you want to start 2025 off with headlining in New Japan?
Well, I mean, if I'm being a pragmatist, it would probably be Naito and Suji,
Hmm.
because I think that would be the match that would give you the best of all worlds in that sense. If I'm being like an idealist, it would be Naito Goto, because I just want that story to be told. And you can give Goto a few months, let him lose to a New Japan Cup guy. But I think if I was trying to balance everything, in a way that wasn't just, I guess it would probably be Suji, actually, now that I think about it. I think the other option is Naito Shingo, since that still is a very fresh match. It's only happened twice. I think people would clamor for that one. I think, the idea of like getting somebody out of LIJ and getting another faction, since like, they tried to make new factions last year. Strong Style was a disaster. Just a complete catastrophe. Didn't work in any way. Kind of really gummied up Desperado, I feel. And obviously Narita, like, I mean, not that they didn't try. I mean, it was like fucking Lion King with like the thing where like they both have their hand on his shoulder as he's looking back at the crowd. And Just Five Guys has been, very, very nondescript, as I guess the gimmick entails. So I guess either Naito and either Suji or Shingo, and I would try to like say like we're reaching like the salad years of the Lij thing, and it's time to probably like move in a different direction where it kind of becomes like Great Bash Heel or something, where it becomes Naito's sort of legacy faction, but everybody's sort of moving on from it.
Yeah,
So I guess I'd go that way. I mean, obviously, like if you told me I got the job before the G1, it would be fucking Takeshita, no doubt. But if I'm inheriting this mess, then I am probably having Naito beat Sabre. I don't care about the copper box, so I don't care about putting the title on Zack for that show. Um, you
wow,
know,
you're really letting the British have it on this podcast.
I there's some Olympic results that piss me off, obviously.
Yeah. All right,
But
so you and MJF are like this, right? Like real tight about the hatred of the British.
does he hate the British?
Yeah, he's doing a gimmick where he hates he's the U.S. He won the internet. You're gonna love this. He won the international championship and changed it to the American championship, and he's going
Oh,
to defend it against Will Ospreay in Wembley Stadium in like
what
two
a
hours.
pampered Jersey prick, man. I would yeah, I think I'd go that route. I think I'd do the Lij thing.
Yeah, I mean, New Japan does seem kind of like married to like the factions. Like we talked about, like LIJ's been around for years. Bullet Club's been around for like a decade. Chaos has been around even longer. Um,
Another thing WWE stole, they finally started doing factions, and look how it went for them.
well, like factions that last forever,
Right.
which like WWE has done factions for a long time, but like the idea that like your factions have multi generations of people in it, and like I
Yeah.
don't know, it feels kind of like part of it feels a little like I understand like especially in terms of like Lij and Bullet Club, like there's merchandise dollars, and obviously Lij is still really popular, but it does feel like you're kind of like watching like almost like this relic from the past when it's like the roster's got all these new faces on it. There's a lot of established wrestlers that aren't around anymore. There's guys that retired. There are guys that moved to other companies. There are guys that just kind of been phased out of any meaningful role. And yet the factions stay the same, almost like they're sports teams. Um, and like the players on the teams change and stuff like that. Um, so it's pretty um interesting. Like you said, they try to create some new factions like last year, and it went like horribly wrong.
Yeah.
Um, so um, I don't know what if there's like a solution to that, but it makes the company feel kind of like it makes it feel dated a little bit. That like we're still like in
Right.
previous era of factions instead of starting something new. Like this was Dragon Gate, they would just they would
Right.
break
They
up
would
and start something
cycle
new.
it out.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I
I mean,
understand. I understand why you wouldn't do that with like a thing like Lij or Bullet Club, just because there's so much money and stuff still involved with that.
yeah. But I think, like, the beauty of factions is that you can bring people in, they sort of inherit the credibility of the faction they come into.
Hmm.
So, like, Suji's the top new guy, but he was put into the top faction, right? But we've got to get him out of that. You know, it may be a bit soon, like now, but like we've got to start pushing towards him being his own guy, you know, and whatever that ends up looking like, because you've got to be a faction leader to be the guy, and I think him and Uemura need that eventually. Now that I think about it, this Uemura injury actually is probably a blessing in disguise, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's what I was
Like
thinking
even
a little
more
bit.
than I
Was
thought.
like maybe if they had huge plans for him in the fall or something like that, but when the company needs a shot in the arm, like late, like in the springtime or like late in the winter, like post Wrestle Kingdom, it would be a great time
Right.
for him to show up and be like, oh yeah, because I think he went out. Like it's part of the intrigue of like when he went out. The same thing kind of happened to Cody when Cody like came back to WWE,
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
um, he was getting really over, and then like he got really badly injured, and then he was able to come back like for the Royal Rumble, which kind of like was allowed him to kind of like recapture that momentum, as opposed to maybe he would have gone a little stale in between if he had been like just doing
Right.
some like B feuds to kill time until he came back and won the Royal Rumble. Um,
Yeah, and I wonder, like, so far the new guys have just been guys who just face each other. And I wonder if this like is a little bit of a catalyst where one of them now has like a real story that people can get behind, you know what I mean? Like it just shakes things up in that generation a bit. Where now you've got this guy who really has something to prove, and he gets that, injury return boost that they could really do a lot with.
yeah, and I think it will come at like an advantageous time on the calendar, too, as opposed to like in the fall. Like I guess they care about the fall a lot more than they did, but usually like post G1, really post, once Kings of Pro Wrestling calls down, unless you're like really into the real world tag league, like it's time to check out of New Japan.
I'll watch it, but
Yeah, but you're not. You're a sicko.
I am. I
Do you
am.
have anything? Do you have
That's
anything
how
you
it
want to?
manifests.
Yeah. Do you have anything you want to plug?
Well, hold on. You had me put it out there, so I would go with those. What would you go with? They gave you the
Um,
book, the pencil.
if I had the pencil, I mean Suji versus Naito. I believe in Suji the most of the young guys, and I think Suji
Hmm.
should. Um, and I think you should use Wrestle Kingdom as an opportunity to elevate a guy to a higher level. Um, so you're not so reliant on uh Naito to do
Yeah.
everything. And I like there's some positive momentum. I really thought Suji I thought some of the G1 matches Suji wrestled, they ended up really good, but the crowds were pretty quiet during the start of them.
I thought that
Um,
too. I'm glad you brought that up.
yeah,
Yeah,
but by the end of them, they were getting like pretty over. And I thought like his last two matches, were really strong atmosphere. So I do feel like there's some good momentum coming um, from that for him. Like it's not just like
right.
we're gonna push this guy because we need to push somebody. I do feel like there's some organic momentum building up for him that the people will get behind. I think people generally like it's obviously tough to replace older names, but you're at the point where you don't really have a choice because a lot of the old
Right.
established names aren't around anymore. So, and I think people do. I think people generally want to see cool new names.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think what you're saying fits in historically too, because like you just like even if you're pushing these guys concurrently to each other, you need somebody to get there first. Like the original Three Musketeers, they were generally just pushed along equally, but somebody got to a certain place first. Like I think Muto won the title first, Chono won
mhm,
the G1 first. And then obviously famously, they pushed Nakamura to the moon, which then gave Tanahashi and kind of Shibata, but especially Tanahashi, like the ultimate motivation, right? And now I think we've got that chance again. And I kind of feel like this is why when I say like this is a real special G1, like you don't get these G1s very often where we're in this transition period and you're seeing these guys grow. Like, my match of the tournament was Takeshita Tsuji night one because the atmosphere was just so incredible. And you legitimately felt like you were watching something special, like a real turning point in, wherever we are right now. You don't see that very often, especially between guys who aren't the same company at the moment. So no, I think what you're saying is totally accurate. I totally 100% behind it. Like we need to set that plane so that everybody has their motivation set too.
mhm. All right, cool. Do you have anything you want to plug that we haven't discussed yet?
Ooh. Well, people usually leave me alone, so it doesn't seem to work. But I do have an X. I got the X. I am at Ryugu Joe, so it's a little pun on my name, but it's RYUGU_JO. I also have a secret podcast that I do with my best friend. We've been best friends since 1993. We don't promote it. I'm not even going to tell you what the name is. If you can find it, enjoy. Although it's probably pretty bad because it's just me going to his house and then he basically just has the microphone going and we just talk until we feel like we're done talking.
All right. Thanks so
It's
much for
about
joining.
wrestling, but it's
Okay,
about
yeah.
wrestling,
Let's just
but
say,
like we just did a show last night actually, and we actually didn't end up talking about wrestling. We just talked about the Olympics and I think ice cream for about 2 hours. So,
oh, so
you
it's like the
know,
flag. It was like the flagship.
yep. So if you can find it, enjoy.
All right, excellent. Thanks so much, Jim Michael. Appreciate all listeners, and we'll talk to you again after a while.